It began with thunder across the steppe, the rumble of engines, the roar of artillery, the whine of aircraft cutting through the September sky. In the late summer of 1941, the vast plains of Ukraine became the stage for one of the most devastating military operations in human history. The Battle of Kiev, fought between the armies of Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, was not merely a battle, it was a catastrophe on a scale so immense that even the victors were stunned. Over the course of weeks, entire Soviet armies were surrounded, annihilated, and captured in what would become the largest encirclement in the history of warfare. For Germany, it was the crowning triumph of Operation Barbarossa, a demonstration of the Wehrmacht's ruthless efficiency and the power of its blitzkrieg tactics. For the Soviet Union, it was a nightmare, a wound so deep it nearly ended the nation's ability to fight. And yet from that ruin, the seeds of eventual victory would be sown. This is the story of the Battle of Kiev, the encirclement that shattered an army and redefined the cost of war. The invasion of the Soviet Union began on June 22, 1941, with a ferocity that defied imagination. More than 3 million German soldiers, supported by thousands of tanks, aircraft, and artillery pieces, surged across an 800-mile front in Operation Barbarossa. Hitler's colossal gamble to destroy communism and conquer the East. Within weeks, entire Soviet fronts were collapsing. Cities fell in rapid succession. Minsk, Smolensk, Riga, and the Red Army, stunned by speed and deception, fought desperately to hold the line. Yet amid the chaos, one bastion still stood firm. The Ukrainian capital of Kiev, strategically vital for its railways, industry, and the Dnieper River's crossings, Kiev anchored the southern front. To Hitler, it was both a prize and a threat. To Joseph Stalin, it was sacred ground. He ordered his generals to defend it at all costs, a decision that would seal the fate of hundreds of thousands. By late August, the German Army Group South, commanded by Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, had already crossed deep into Ukraine. To the North, Army Group Center, under Field Marshal Fedor von Bock, pushed toward Moscow. Between them, the Soviet Southwestern Front, led by Marshal Semyon Budyonny and General Mikhail Kirpenes, held firm around Kiev, forming a massive bulge in the German line, a salient that both sides knew could not last. German generals urged Hitler to push straight toward Moscow, but the Führer, obsessed with destroying Soviet forces in the south, ordered a monumental pincer movement instead. From the north, Heinz Guderian's 2nd Panzer Group swung down from the Smolensk region. From the south, Ewald von Kleist's 1st Panzer Group drove north from the Black Sea, their objective to meet east of Kiev and trap the entire Soviet Southwestern Front in a steel embrace. The encirclement began in early September. Guderian's tanks, driving at lightning speed, crossed the Desna River and broke through the Soviet flank. At the same time, Kleist's armored columns thundered northward through Poltava and Kremenchuk, smashing resistance and tearing through exhausted Red Army lines. Villages burned, columns of refugees stretched for miles along the roads, caught between the front lines of two advancing monsters. The jaws of the trap began to close. Soviet commanders pleaded with Moscow for permission to withdraw, but Stalin refused. Kiev must be held, he insisted, convinced that any retreat was treason. Kirpenes obeyed, torn between duty and reason, even as German forces closed in behind him. By mid-September, the circle was complete. Near the towns of Lokhvitsa and Lubny, Guderian's and Kleist's spearheads met, a moment of triumph for the Wehrmacht and disaster for the Red Army. Inside the pocket, nearly 4 entire Soviet armies, the 5th, 21st, 26th, and 37th, were trapped. Cut off from supplies, surrounded by armor, and under constant air attack, the Soviet troops fought with desperate courage. They tried to break out, launching counterattacks in every direction, but it was too late. German artillery pounded them relentlessly. The Luftwaffe turned the encircled area into a burning wasteland. Villages disappeared under bombardment. Streams ran red with blood. Within days, order disintegrated. Ammunition ran out. Rations were gone. Soviet soldiers resorted to hand-to-hand combat, fighting in the forests and swamps, refusing to surrender even as the noose tightened. When the battle finally ended in late September, the scale of the disaster was almost beyond comprehension. More than 665,000 Soviet troops were captured, along with thousands of tanks, guns, and vehicles. It was the largest single encirclement in military history, a victory so massive that even Hitler, usually unshakable in his arrogance, was astonished. German propaganda trumpeted the battle as proof of Nazi invincibility. Photographs of endless columns of Soviet prisoners filled newspapers across Europe. But beneath the triumph, there was a hidden truth. The victory at Kiev had come at a cost of precious time. The delay diverted forces from the Central Front, forces that might have reached Moscow before the onset of winter. The triumph in Ukraine would in time prove to be the fatal overreach of the German campaign. For the Soviet Union, Kiev was an abyss. Entire armies vanished, their commanders killed or captured. Among the dead was General Kirpinus, who fell while attempting to escape the encirclement. The Soviet leadership was stunned. The Red Army, already battered and reeling, had suffered one of the greatest defeats in its history. Yet, paradoxically, the disaster forced transformation. The illusion of quick victory for Germany was shattered by its own success. The Soviets learned, adapted, and hardened. In the ruins of Kiev, in the shattered remnants of its soldiers, a new army was born, one that would in time drive the invaders all the way back to Berlin. The Battle of Kiev was more than a military event. It was a tragedy of humanity on a colossal scale. The prisoners marched westward into captivity, many never to return. The civilians of Ukraine endured unimaginable suffering as their cities burned and their families starved. The encirclement was not just the destruction of armies, it was the collapse of an entire world. Yet from that collapse rose resilience, a defiance that no encirclement, no defeat could extinguish. Today, the fields around Kiev are peaceful. The rivers calm, the villages rebuilt. But beneath the soil lies a graveyard without boundaries. Hundreds of thousands of men who vanished in September 1941. Their names remembered only by history. The Battle of Kiev remains a symbol of both the heights of military strategy and the depths of human suffering. A reminder of how swiftly triumph can become tragedy. Tonight we return to those endless plains of Ukraine, to the roar of engines, the cries of the encircled, and the silence that followed. This is the entire history of the Battle of Kiev, the largest encirclement in history, the turning point of destruction, and the moment when the price of Hitler's ambition was written in blood across the steppes. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from? And what time is it for you tonight? The summer of 1941 stretched over Ukraine like a golden quilt, warm and forgiving. Fields of wheat shimmered in the slow wind, their edges whispering against each other as if trading secrets too ancient to name. The villages lay scattered between rivers and orchards, bound together by paths worn smooth by generations. In these quiet spaces, life followed its small, patient rhythm. A farmer mending a plough, a child watching clouds drift over the Dnieper. The hum of insects rose and fell with the sunlight, the soft music of a land untouched by fear. Evening came gently with long shadows over haystacks and the scent of bread cooling in window sills. Trains rolled lazily across the steppe, their iron wheels singing low, steady songs to no one in particular. Time felt unbroken, circular, kind. It was a season that made people believe that tomorrow would always resemble today. And yet beneath this calm something faint and cold had already begun to move. The people of Kiev walked under trees heavy with leaves, unaware that history was drawing near. Children splashed in the Dnieper's shallows, chasing dragonflies that darted through the light. Market squares filled with laughter and argument, the familiar theatre of ordinary days. Old men played chess in shaded courtyards, their quiet concentration mirroring the stillness of the city itself. Radios carried music, sometimes news, but no words yet, sharp enough to pierce the illusion. Life moved at a human pace, slow enough for thought, gentle enough for hope. Even soldiers on leave, their uniforms softened by dust, believed the war in the West would stay far away. The air smelled of fruit, grain and sun. Every sound seemed harmless, every silence reassuring. In that hush, destiny waited like a faint tremor beneath the soil. Across the countryside, the Dnieper glimmered, broad, calm, and ancient. It had seen empires rise and vanish, but never had its waters looked so deceptively peaceful. Barges drifted past villages whose names few outsiders could pronounce. Women washed clothes at its edges, their songs carrying over the current in voices that belonged to no single century. The water reflected their movements with perfect stillness, as if memorizing them before they disappeared. To travelers it seemed that nothing could disturb such harmony, but the horizon, always so wide, now held a strange clarity, a brightness too sharp, a silence too complete. Sometimes the birds startled for no reason, vanishing into the sky without a sound. Those who noticed said nothing, and the river flowed on slow and indifferent toward the future. In farmhouses, families ate together under oil lamps, speaking softly, unhurriedly. The men discussed the harvest and the soil, not politics or fear. News of distant battles in Poland and France felt unreal. The concern of another world. The earth under their feet felt certain, older than borders, older than generals. Fields promised grain, not graves. There was comfort in repetition, in milking cows at dawn, in bread baked the same way every day for 100 years. The rhythm of work made life feel eternal, immune to disruption. Even as trains passed in the distance, carrying unseen soldiers east, people assumed it was routine. Faith in normalcy is its own kind of blindness, soft and absolute. And through that blindness, the summer deepened, gentle as a hand over the eyes. Kiev itself, the ancient city by the river, breathed quietly under the wide blue sky. Bells chimed from the old churches, the notes dissolving in the warm air. Students studied on park benches, lovers walked along the embankments, and the markets overflowed with sunflowers and laughter. Streetcars rattled over cobblestones, their sounds comforting in their familiarity. Each sound told its listeners that life was unbroken. Yet sometimes on clear mornings, the sky seemed too open, as if it could carry more than just sunlight. Airmen at the city's edge looked upward longer than usual, sensing something invisible beyond the clouds. A restlessness hung over the barracks, a feeling that could not yet find words. The days remained golden, but they began to feel fragile, and each evening the sun lingered a little too long, as though reluctant to leave. Beyond the city, soldiers trained quietly along the frontier, their drills mechanical but uncertain. Orders came slowly, often contradictory, carried by officers who smiled without conviction. They spoke of defense, of readiness, of loyalty to a distant voice in Moscow. But behind their words lay unease, the kind that grows in the absence of truth. Some wrote letters home, promising to visit after maneuvers, not knowing how near the end of peace truly was. The nights were warm and full of crickets, stars burned with careless beauty, the world still seemed vast and forgiving. Yet in the forests to the north, engines were already rumbling, hidden behind the trees. The line between calm and calamity was thinner than the morning mist, and still the soldiers slept soundly, lulled by the hum of summer air. The land itself felt timeless. Rolling fields, stone churches, and small rivers threading between them. The sound of wind in the grain could make a person forget the world beyond sight. Old songs drifted through the villages, melodies that had survived Tsars, revolutions, and famine. To sing them was to believe that nothing essential could ever be taken away. Yet memory is deceptive, and the earth is patient with illusion. The same paths that once led to markets would soon lead to chaos. The same bridges that carried laughter would soon carry ash. But for now, only the present existed, warm, golden, and merciful. People mistook beauty for safety, as humans often do, and so the summer went on, full of grace and unknowing. By late June, the days had grown long and heavy with promise. The wheat stood tall, the rivers full, and the hearts of men still light. Rumors of war floated through taverns and post offices, but no one truly listened. It was easier to believe in the durability of peace than in the fragility of tomorrow. Fathers repaired fences, children chased dogs through fields, and mothers hummed songs older than memory. The land, vast and indifferent, seemed to absorb every sound and still remain silent. Life felt unassailable, but history was already on the move. In a few hours that stillness would shatter beyond repair, and so as dusk fell on the last peaceful night, Ukraine slept beneath a sky too calm to be trusted. Dawn came early on the 22nd of June, quiet and radiant over the forests of the frontier. The birds sang as they always had, unaware that they were greeting the beginning of the largest invasion in human history. Then, as the horizon blushed with first light, the hum of engines began, faint at first, then growing until the earth itself seemed to vibrate. Hundreds of thousands of German troops stood ready, faces pale in the half-light, eyes fixed eastward toward the unknown. Tanks waited in lines that stretched farther than sight, and behind them came trucks, artillery, and columns of men who believed they were about to end a war before the summer ended. When the signal came, it was simple. A command passed down in murmurs, and then everything moved. Bridges thundered under steel tracks, dust rose in soft clouds, and the sound of war began its slow, rhythmic breath. The border posts vanished beneath the tide. Within hours the line between Germany and the Soviet Union became an echo, and by sunrise the invasion that Hitler had named Operation Barbarossa was already devouring the horizon. Far above, the air grew restless with motion. Waves of aircraft glided eastward, silver shapes catching the early light. Their engines rolled through the valleys like distant thunder, steady and unbroken. Below, Soviet airfields lay still, their pilots waking to a noise that no one yet understood. Bombs fell in silence at first, then with dull, heavy impacts that erased the comfort of morning. The air itself seemed to tremble, thick with dust and smoke and disbelief. Radios crackled without coherence, voices overlapping in panic and confusion. The defenders had no clear orders, only fragments of words that dissolved into static. Some ran toward the sound, others simply stared upward, caught between awe and fear. and as the sky darkened with movement, the world beneath it seemed to stop breathing. Across hundreds of miles, German divisions surged forward, a living current of iron and determination. The ground shook beneath the march of thousands, yet the rhythm of their advance was almost graceful in its precision. Engines growled like a mechanical heart, and the smell of oil and dust hung in the warm summer air. Fields that had once been silent now trembled under tracks that pressed deep into the soil. Villages appeared and disappeared, half seen through haze, as though the land itself were being folded away. For the soldiers within those columns, the world had narrowed to the hum of motion, the endless forward pull. They believed in momentum, in speed, in destiny measured by miles. The sun climbed higher, burning through the haze, and still they advanced. The invasion was no longer a plan. It had become a force of nature, and as the hours passed, it carried everything with it. On the Soviet side, disbelief reigned. The border guards had seen the build-up, yet the orders had been to wait, to avoid provocation. Now their telephones rang with silence, their lines cut or overrun. Commanders demanded answers that no one could give. Maps scattered across desks, as men tried to understand how an entire front could dissolve in a single morning. Reports came in too fast to read, each one worse than the last. And still from the west, the low rumble never stopped. It was not just a sound anymore, but a presence, vast, patient, inevitable. The defenders fought to form lines, but the lines themselves had already vanished. And above it all, the sun continued to shine, indifferent to the human confusion beneath it. By midday, the breadth of the invasion revealed itself in silence more than sound. From the Baltic to the Black Sea, 3 million German soldiers moved eastward in a tide that seemed endless. Each formation had its purpose, each division its path. Some cut through forests, others crossed plains, golden with unharvested wheat. The earth turned to dust beneath them, a soft haze that followed the columns like memory. In some places resistance flickered, brave and brief before being swallowed. Yet for every moment of struggle, there were 10 of disbelief, as though the world itself had forgotten how to resist. Even nature seemed to pause, holding its breath as the lines advanced. The birds fled east, the wind shifted west, and still the tide came on, steady as fate. In Moscow, the first reports reached Stalin's desk, fragmented, uncertain, and unbelievable. He refused to accept them. Certain it was a provocation, a misunderstanding, perhaps even sabotage. His generals stood in uneasy silence, waiting for him to speak. No one dared to say what they already knew, that the German invasion had begun in full. Across the Kremlin gardens, the summer air remained tranquil, the fountains murmuring as if to hide the truth. Outside Moscow continued its daily rhythm, unaware that its world had already changed. Somewhere beyond that horizon, entire armies were being swallowed by confusion. Yet in that moment, denial still seemed safer than recognition. The human heart resists the idea of disaster, even when the evidence is everywhere. And so the morning passed, wrapped in disbelief, as the storm gathered strength. As the day lengthened, the invasion's rhythm deepened into something almost hypnotic. Convoys moved as if to music, each turn and halt rehearsed in the discipline of years. The roads became rivers of metal and motion, glinting beneath the sun. For those marching east, the war still felt clean, a campaign of victory, not ruin. They could not see the future written behind them in the smoke. For those retreating, it felt like the collapse of everything familiar, too vast to understand. In every direction, dust rose, veiling the horizon in pale gold. It was the color of distance, of something lost, but not yet mourned. The wind carried that dust over fields and towns alike, softening the edges of destruction, and through that dust the day continued, slow and unstoppable. By nightfall, the horizon burned with faint light, not flame but reflection, the afterglow of a day that had changed the world. The first day of Operation Barbarossa had ended, but its echo stretched far beyond the sunset. Across thousands of miles, soldiers lay awake under open skies, listening to engines rumble in the dark. Some thought of home, others of orders yet to come. Few understood the scale of what had begun, or how long it would last. The invasion had moved too quickly for comprehension, too smoothly for remorse. The earth that had been quiet that morning now carried the sound of a new age arriving. And yet, in the deep hours of that first night, the wind was still gentle, the stars still bright. The world continued to turn, as if nothing had changed at all. But beneath that stillness, history had already taken its first irreversible breath. The sun rose over the steppe with deceptive gentleness, casting a pale gold across the endless grass. In the distance, the faint thunder of engines had already moved on, leaving behind a stillness that felt both peaceful and unkind. The land smelled of dust and heat, a silence so complete that even the wind seemed reluctant to move. Scattered Soviet soldiers emerged from shallow trenches and thickets, blinking into the light as though waking from a long, disordered dream. They no longer knew where the front was, nor if their own lines still existed. The maps in their pockets were meaningless now, their borders erased by motion too fast to follow. Radios crackled with static, their voices lost to the empty air. Some men walked aimlessly, carrying rifles without conviction, listening for sounds that might tell them where the war had gone. But the steppe offered no answers, only the whisper of grass brushing against their boots. And so they moved slowly and without direction through a landscape that had already forgotten them. The sense of time began to dissolve. Hours drifted without shape, the sun crawling overhead with patient indifference. Soldiers gathered in small groups, speaking in low tones that faded almost as soon as they were spoken. No one knew who was in command, or which way safety lay. The world had been reduced to wind, hunger, and the need to keep walking. Sometimes they found a broken vehicle, a dead radio, a canteen half full of warm water, fragments of order scattered by the storm. They would rest for a while, then move on, drawn by habit more than hope. Even in confusion, routine was a comfort. They still marched, even if no one led them, and in the rhythm of their footsteps, the steppe seemed to murmur back, soft, indifferent, and eternal. Villages appeared like mirages, quiet, half abandoned, their windows open to the warm wind. The soldiers entered them carefully, unsure if friend or foe waited inside. More often, there was no one, only the faint smell of smoke and bread long cooled. Chickens wandered through courtyards, oblivious to war, while dogs barked once and fell silent again. Wells offered tepid water, a mercy to those who had walked too far. In some houses, radios still played broken melodies, unaware their stations no longer spoke to anyone. The men would sit for a time in those rooms, touching furniture, running fingers over photographs left on tables, remembering that the world had once been human. But the air was different now. It carried distance, absence, and the echo of retreat. When they left, they closed the doors behind them out of habit, as though the owners might still return. And beyond the villages, the grass resumed its endless whispering, leading them onward into nowhere. Messages no longer reached their destinations. Headquarters, once alive with telephones and orders, now stood empty, paper fluttering through shattered windows. Couriers rode for hours across the plains, finding no one to receive their words. The front had dissolved into silence, a great invisible tide swallowing both sides of the battle. Even the air seemed weary, holding its breath between one disaster and the next. The Soviet command structure, immense and proud, had been reduced to fragments, pockets of men who did not know they were alone. Still, discipline lingered like instinct. The soldiers saluted the officers they met, even if they could no longer tell which direction the enemy lay. There was something almost gentle in that persistence, a quiet dignity beneath the disarray. In confusion they found a strange calm, as if uncertainty itself were a kind of mercy. And above them the sky spread wide and blue, indifferent to all human hierarchies. As days passed, the steppe became their only companion. It stretched endlessly in every direction, a living sea of grass and dust, vast enough to swallow hope. The soldiers began to notice its small details, the hum of insects, the smell of sage, the way the wind bent each stalk in slow, rhythmic waves. At night the stars were enormous, sharp as frost, and the air cooled enough to make them forget the day's exhaustion. They built small fires and spoke softly of home, not of war. Some laughed at their own misfortune. Others simply stared at the embers, lost in thought. The silence between them was heavy but not cruel. It was the kind of silence that listens, not the kind that condemns. The world around them had shrunk to warmth, breath, and starlight, and through that stillness, the war felt like a rumor, distant and unreal. Occasionally, they would encounter other wandering groups, men as lost as themselves. Exchanges were brief, names, units, last known orders, fragments of direction. Sometimes they joined together, sometimes they moved apart again, following instincts neither could explain. No one argued, for argument had no meaning. When the front itself had vanished, they had become travelers in their own country, pilgrims of confusion, following paths that led only to more open sky. Hunger no longer frightened them. It was just another quiet companion. When they found a stream, they drank deeply and without ceremony, grateful to feel something living. Each day began and ended with the same sun, the same wind, the same uncertain hope. They were learning how to exist without knowledge, to breathe within uncertainty. And in that surrender, a strange peace began to form. The steppe changed slowly as they moved, from gold to grey, from grass to dust, from comfort to emptiness. The sound of distant engines faded entirely, replaced by the endless sigh of the plains. Sometimes a single aircraft would cross the sky, too high to tell whose it was. The soldiers would pause, shading their eyes, then continue walking. The land offered no guidance, but it offered endurance, and that was enough. Some began to speak less, saving their voices as though words might run out. Others sang softly to themselves, half remembering songs from childhood. Their uniforms were worn, their faces lined by dust, but there was still a faint dignity in their movement. The dignity of men who keep going because standing still would mean despair. The days bled together, and still they moved forward, and beneath each step the earth whispered something only the heart could hear. When the next evening came, the horizon turned red with sunset, and the steppe fell silent once more. The men settled among the tall grass, letting the cool air wash over them. Somewhere far ahead, the war continued, vast, loud, merciless, but here it was only a memory of sound. They had become part of the landscape, small figures in a boundless stillness. The sky deepened into violet, and the stars began to bloom like slow flowers in the dark. No one spoke, there was nothing left to say. The air carried a faint sweetness, a promise of rest, if not of safety, For the first time, some felt an odd sense of peace, as though the chaos had passed them by entirely. Sleep came easily beneath that open sky, soft and without dreams. And as the night grew deeper, the distant echoes of war faded into the hush of the wind, carrying them gently toward the coming storm of Kiev. Morning light draped over Kiev like a soft shawl, golden and gentle, as though the city itself refused to believe in war. Trams rattled down the cobbled streets, their bells ringing faintly over the hum of conversation. Women stood in quiet lines before bakeries, shawls drawn close, the smell of bread mingling with the scent of lilac and dust. The Dnieper flowed past in calm silver ripples, carrying reflections of bridges, domes, and drifting clouds. Somewhere a phonograph played a tango, faint and slow, the melody curling through open windows like smoke. Newspapers still printed bold headlines, but the words had begun to feel distant, belonging to another unreal world. Life persisted in its rituals, a stubborn form of hope. Children chased one another through courtyards, their laughter bright against the slow rhythm of footsteps and trolley wheels. Pigeons fluttered over the roofs, unbothered by the tension threading through the air. And though everything seemed ordinary, the city's heartbeat had begun to quicken, softly, almost imperceptibly. In cafes along Krishchatik Street, men in worn coats sipped coffee that had grown weaker with each passing week. Conversations drifted around them, polite but hollow, filled with rumors that no one wanted to claim as true. A woman read aloud a letter from her son at the front, her voice trembling only once before she smiled. The others nodded, offering small words of comfort they did not believe. Outside, a tram halted, its doors opening with a sigh, and the passengers stepped down as if emerging into a dream that might dissolve at any moment. The air smelled faintly of coal smoke and rain, heavy with the promise of change. Along the riverbanks, fishermen still cast their lines, more for habit than hunger. Soldiers in uniform passed quietly through the streets, their expressions unreadable, their boots leaving the same marks as everyone else. There was no panic yet, only a quiet unease that lived beneath conversation, beneath breath itself. And in that tension, the calm of the city deepened, like still water before a storm. At noon, the church bells rang, slow and resonant, echoing over the city's rooftops. Their sound blended with the faint drone of an air raid siren. Only a test, people said, just another precaution. The wail rose and fell like a lament, then faded, leaving a fragile silence that no one wished to break. Old men returned to their chessboards in the parks, moving pieces with studied calm. Mothers pushed prams along shaded avenues, their eyes following the clouds more often than the children. A boy climbed a tree to rescue a trapped kite, laughing when he caught it, his voice carrying across the quiet street. The trolley lines hummed faintly overhead, the sound soft as a sigh. Every rhythm of the city continued, deliberate and tender, as though motion itself might hold back the tide. The soldiers stationed near the outskirts watched the western horizon, where smoke sometimes smudged the sky. But no one yet called it danger. Only distance, only rumor, only tomorrow. Shops still opened each morning, their windows displaying goods that grew fewer by the day. The shelves were lined with substitutions, chicory instead of coffee, paper flowers instead of silk, a child's carved wooden toy instead of tin. The merchant smiled with tired patience, knowing there was comfort in the act of pretending. Markets buzzed with low conversation, a fragile normalcy bound together by the scent of onions, bread, and horse sweat. Radios played soft waltzes, their melodies fragile as cobwebs, straining to fill the growing quiet between buildings. Somewhere near Podol, a tram broke down, and the driver, red-faced and laughing, tinkered with the controls while passers-by offered advice. It was a small, ordinary moment, but people lingered, grateful for the distraction. Even as ration books appeared and queues grew longer, the rhythm of daily life persisted. Each gesture a quiet refusal of fear, and beneath that persistence, the city exhaled, holding its breath for what it already sensed was coming. In courtyards shaded by acacia trees, children played beneath fluttering laundry. The smell of soap and dust mingled with laughter and the hollow thud of a bouncing ball. Mothers watched from windows, mending shirts and humming softly to themselves. A cat slept on a sunlit wall, undisturbed by the faint rumble that sometimes trembled through the distance. A teacher paused on her walk home, looking up at the sky, vast, clear, impossibly blue. Somewhere far beyond sight, something was moving closer. But here, the afternoon light was still warm, and the scent of blooming linden trees filled the air. Time seemed to stretch, suspended between peace and the first echo of loss. Even the silence felt generous, as though the city itself wanted to give its people one last gentle hour. And so Kiev remained beautiful, willfully, defiantly beautiful, in the shadow of its approaching fate. As evening fell, the city glowed in amber and smoke. Street lamps flickered to life, their light gathering in small pools across the cobblestones. Couples strolled along the river embankment, the air cool and heavy with the scent of the Dnieper. Musicians played near the cafes, their notes rising softly into the gathering dark. Somewhere a voice called out for supper. Somewhere else, laughter drifted through an open window. But above it all, the sound of distant thunder lingered, not from the sky, but from beyond the horizon, low and steady. The sound went unnoticed by most, folded neatly into the hum of life. Still the pigeons stirred uneasily, and the dogs began to bark at nothing they could see. The river carried its slow reflections eastward, away from the coming storm. And as the last light faded, the air seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something unnamed. That night, the stars over Kiev shone clear and sharp, untouched by the smoke gathering at the edge of the world. Windows glowed softly in the dark, each one a small island of warmth and faith. Radios whispered lullabies and speeches, the voices gentle, almost reassuring. In the narrow alleys, the wind moved lightly, carrying the faint scent of bread from the night bakeries. The soldiers on watch smoked in silence, their faces lit by brief sparks, eyes turned westward. Somewhere a mother whispered a prayer, folding it into the quiet like a thread of hope. The city slept uneasily, cradled by a silence too perfect to trust. Over the rooftops, an owl cried once, its wings vanishing into the night. And beneath that stillness, the pulse of the earth trembled faintly, warning of footsteps drawing near. But for now, the city dreamed, unaware that dawn would bring its first shadow. By morning, the air carried a strange taste, metallic and dry, as if the wind had traveled far through ash. People woke to the same sounds, the trams, the footsteps, the calling of vendors, yet something in the rhythm had changed. The world seemed thinner, quieter, expectant. Along the streets, whispers passed faster than the trams themselves. The front was closer, the armies moving fast. The Dnieper no longer a distance but a border. In doorways neighbors spoke in low voices, half believing, half denying. Still the breadlines formed, the children laughed, and the bells of Saint Sophia tolled with patient grace. Life for a final moment held its fragile balance. The sky was vast and blue again, the same as it had always been. But beneath that calm, every sound, Every breath felt poised on the edge of change. And as the day unfolded, Kiev stood quietly, the city before collapse, still beautiful, still unbroken, still dreaming. The Dnieper stretched wide and silver, beneath a sky that seemed too calm to belong to the moment. Its waters moved slowly, almost lazily, curling around the riverbanks with an indifferent patience. On its shores soldiers paused, rifles slung, maps unfolded in hesitant hands, tracing lines that were already obsolete. Bridges arched over the water, fragile in appearance, yet carrying the weight of men and machines alike. Dust rose in small spirals where tanks and trucks approached, a dry haze that hung in the summer air. The river's surface reflected clouds and sun in delicate fragments, each ripple carrying the sound of quiet currents and distant engines. Officers murmured over reports, their eyes tracing the lines of defense, as though the water itself might answer. And in that quiet, the river seemed to whisper back, patient and eternal, holding the weight of decisions, and the inevitability of what was to come. The horizon pressed close, the steppe narrowing toward water that had become both shield and obstacle. And so they waited, the river stretching endlessly before them. Men walked along the banks, boots leaving prints that the tide would eventually erase. Some paused to drink from shallow edges, tasting the earth mixed with the river, a cool and ancient flavor that seemed to belong to no one. In the distance, the hum of engines rose and fell, a distant conversation between earth and machine. Soldiers folded maps, their creases worn, folding them again as if understanding might return in repetition. Bridges held their fragile forms under weight, creaking softly in the wind, the sound unnoticed except by those who listened. Boats drifted slowly along the surface, carrying men who measured each stroke against the rhythm of their hearts. The river itself seemed to divide more than geography, a boundary between hope and inevitability, between movement and stillness. Sometimes the sunlight glinted off the water, soft as glass, hiding the currents that ran deeper than anyone could see. The air smelled faintly of moss and wet stone, a scent that lingered long after footsteps moved on, and beneath it all, the river whispered patience to those who paused long enough to hear. On the western banks, columns of German armor waited, engines idling with a low, constant hum. The men stood in quiet observation, not rushed, as though time were their ally rather than the river. Maps spread across the hoods of vehicles, officers pointing in measured gestures, planning a crossing that demanded both precision and patience. The sun reflected off polished metal, the warmth soft against uniforms, grounding them in a moment that felt suspended. Birds circled overhead unbothered, their cries a distant punctuation in a quiet that could have been eternal. The grass trembled beneath distant wheels, the vibration faint but certain, like a pulse running through the steppe. Orders were spoken in calm tones, each word measured, deliberate, carrying the weight of consequence without urgency. Even the river seemed to listen, its currents folding gently around sandbars and islands, steady in the knowledge of centuries. Men adjusted their boots, their gloves, their gaze, aware that patience now was as important as strength. And so the afternoon lingered, soft and full as if the world itself held its breath. Across the water, Soviet positions appeared fragmented, clusters of men holding what could be held, their lines invisible until one looked closely. They paused at the edges of the river, eyes tracing the approaching columns, calculating, imagining, hoping against quiet inevitability. The air smelled faintly of summer rain, though none had fallen, and the river carried the scent far downstream. Boats were prepared, oars brushing the water in soft strokes, each movement deliberate and careful. Officers stood near sandbags, maps spread on wooden crates, tracing lines that would soon vanish under motion and noise. A soft wind carried the distant hum of activity from the west, shifting it into the rhythm of currents and reeds. The men spoke in whispers, voices careful not to disturb the natural order of air and water. The sun glinted on steel helmets, a reminder of presence amidst quiet. And through it all, the river listened, its surface holding reflection and depth in equal measure. Each ripple seemed to mark the passage of time that no one could stop. Bridges became instruments of tension, their arches straining under weight, then settling, patient as the river itself. Men worked quietly along the railings, measuring, adjusting, balancing strength with care. Tanks rumbled slowly across approaches, their tracks leaving dark imprints that the river would not forget. The river reflected everything, not judging, only observing, carrying the sound of engines, boots, and whispered commands downstream. Soldiers paused to watch a single hand on a map, a foot tapping softly against metal. Wind rustled the reeds, whispering reassurance or warning in equal measure. On both sides, men felt the pull of movement and the weight of hesitation, the river between them both dividing and connecting. Even as the horizon shimmered with heat, the water remained steady, indifferent to the fate it mirrored, and beneath the surface, currents ran swift and unseen, holding secrets that no one could measure. The river carried patience as both shield and witness, watching quietly as decisions took shape. The light shifted slowly as afternoon stretched toward evening, turning the river into a mirror of copper and gold. Soldiers on the banks moved with quiet purpose, folding maps, adjusting equipment, and waiting. A few birds skimmed the surface, dipping briefly before rising again, unnoticed by those whose attention was fixed on invisible lines and unseen depths. The wind carried the scent of distant earth, dry and soft through the air, blending with the faint metallic tang of machinery. Men spoke quietly, planning, guessing, adjusting their hopes to the rhythm of the river. Each pause carried its own weight, each movement measured as if the river itself set the pace. The steppe beyond the water seemed infinite, folding into the sky in pale waves of green and gold. Even the sun slowed, leaning gently toward the horizon, stretching shadows over rippling water. And as night prepared to fall, the river remained patient and eternal, holding all the waiting within its slow current. When darkness approached, the Dnieper seemed to soften, folding light into reflection and shadow. The hum of engines faded as men rested, listening to the water lapping softly at its banks. Bridges glimmered faintly in the dying light, solid yet fragile, echoes of human intention set against the river's patience. Soldiers paused, tracing lines across maps that now seemed both urgent and endless, each stroke folding into uncertainty. Boats drifted, barely moving, carried by currents too slow to notice, too steady to defy. The air smelled of wet stone and grass, a calm that wrapped around fatigue and anticipation. The men felt the river's weight beneath their feet, beneath their thoughts, beneath the quiet they carried with them. Evening deepened slowly, stretching each moment into gentle eternity, and as stars began to bloom over the water, the river whispered its final message of the day, that time would endure, even when people could not. By nightfall, the currents of the Dnieper held only the memory of motion, reflecting stars, whispers, and distant fires. Soldiers rested along its banks, leaning against sandbags water, and each other breathing in the soft, cool night. Somewhere, an owl called, its cry drifting over the river, as though marking the passage of history itself. The air carried the faint scent of wood smoke and earth, blending with a deep, patient calm. Across the water, the lines of waiting men blurred into shadow and thought. Even in stillness, the river seemed alive, a quiet participant in the slow unfolding of events. Its currents ran past without judgment, indifferent yet witness to every careful gesture, and in that soft, eternal rhythm, the Dnieper held the weight of countless decisions, the quiet reflection of men, and the patient understanding of history moving forward. As sleep approached, the soldiers felt the river's pulse beneath them, guiding them gently toward the next day's inevitable passage. In the quiet of Berlin, maps spread across polished tables, soldiers and officers spoke in measured tones, each word carrying the weight of the coming days. Hitler traced lines with a slender finger, pausing over Kiev as if the act of pointing might summon the city closer. The sun streamed through tall windows, gentle and golden, yet it illuminated decisions that would ripple like hidden tremors across hundreds of miles. Southward he turned his armored divisions, ordering their wheels and tracks to bend the course of history itself. The generals nodded, some in awe, others in quiet apprehension, understanding only partially the vastness of what had been set in motion. Outside, the city carried on unaware, the wind rustling leaves, the faint scent of coal and bread hanging in the air. Even in the offices filled with maps, the silence between words was almost tangible, as though the room itself waited for the consequences to arrive. And far away in the east, men who would be touched by this choice had no inkling of the world shifting above them. The day passed in measured sunlight, yet a quiet urgency lay beneath it, pressing gently against the windows, and in that pause, destiny began to bend toward the river and the steppe beyond. In Moscow, Stalin sat behind heavy curtains, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the office. Reports reached him, fragmented and frantic, warning of German advances, pockets lost, and the speed of armored divisions. He folded each paper with deliberate calm, his face unreadable, his fingers resting on the edge of maps that traced familiar lines now under threat. Advisors urged caution, retreat, flexibility, yet he shook his head. The gesture, absolute and unyielding. There was no debate, only silence, filled with the weight of conviction. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and smoke from distant chimneys, a comfort against the abstract pressure of decision. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers counted on him, and he counted on his own belief in immovability. Outside, winter had not yet arrived, but the city's streets held the hush of anticipation, as if aware of the choices being made far from the front. Each hour stretched longer than the one before, carrying with it both pride and inevitability, and beneath it all, the world waited, turning quietly while men shaped its course. Southward, the armored divisions began their march in earnest, engines humming softly against the early morning light. The ground trembled beneath each tread, and the wind carried the dry scent of dust and machine oil. Soldiers adjusted their gloves and maps, aware that their motion would ripple through villages and forests far beyond immediate sight. Bridges and rivers would soon feel the weight of this decision, though no one along the banks could yet comprehend it. Each wheel, each tank track, became part of a movement that would stretch for miles, invisible yet unstoppable. The steppe seemed to watch its grass whispering against itself, indifferent to which side would claim it first. Officers spoke in quiet tones, pointing to coordinates and estimated times, unaware that even precision could not alter the outcome. Sunlight glinted off metal, soft and deliberate, illuminating paths that led into history. And beneath the hum of engines, the earth itself seemed to bend to the rhythm of choice and motion. Time had slowed yet accelerated at once, carrying men and machines toward a future already written. In Kiev, civilians went about their routines, unaware of the great currents shifting beyond the horizon. Children played in courtyards, their laughter threading through quiet streets, while the smell of bread and lilac filled alleys and avenues. Men and women paused in their tasks to glance toward the horizon, a faint unease settling in the chest, like a quiet echo. Orders given far away had yet to touch this human heartbeat, but the air already seemed heavier. Soldiers watched the western approaches, their eyes tracing distances they could not measure, sensing a change that would arrive without warning. The wind shifted, carrying scents of dust and river, the gentle pulse of the Dnieper, as yet unbroken. Letters were written home, prayers muttered softly, under breath, as if speaking might forestall fate. The sun leaned low, stretching shadows across roofs and cobblestones, blending the ordinary with the unseen. And in that quiet, life continued with a fragile persistence, unaware of the decisions now bending its path. The city slept lightly, unknowingly, waiting for the ripples of history to arrive. Across the steppe, small groups of Soviet soldiers moved through tall grass, unaware that the front was no longer a line but a widening wave. Orders had failed to reach them, radios remained silent, and maps meant little in the absence of guidance. Yet the instinct to move, to follow some unseen direction, persisted. They rested beneath the heat of the sun, drank from rivers, and whispered to one another of home and hope. Each man carried in his mind a faint idea of duty, of strategy, of survival. Fragments now adrift in vast emptiness. The wind carried the sound of distant engines, faint but deliberate, unrecognizable, yet inevitable. Dust rose in soft swirls, settling on uniforms and faces, blending with sweat and soil. And without knowing it, these men were already caught in the motion of decisions made far away, guided by the arrogance and certainty of distant leaders. The steppe remained patient, waiting, eternal, holding both hope and despair in equal measure. And as the day deepened, the currents of fate continued their quiet sweep eastward. Orders, once simple and exact, became instruments of quiet inevitability. Each instruction traced lines across maps, over hills and rivers, connecting people who would never meet yet, would feel the consequences together. Hitler's hand moved with deliberate intent, Stalin's voice restrained with the weight of stubborn pride. The air seemed heavier where these commands were conceived, the sunlight warmer yet laden with something unseen. Soldiers and civilians alike were touched only later, their movements now choreographed by decisions they could not see. Letters and whispers would travel faster than truth, carrying hope and fear indistinguishably. The rhythm of life continued, yet under every heartbeat was the hum of decision, relentless and precise. The river, the steppe, and the city waited, patient witnesses to choices that would define thousands of lives. And in the quiet, it became clear that the world had shifted imperceptibly, as though the earth itself had tilted toward destiny. As dusk fell, Berlin and Moscow lay in quiet reflection, the same sun sinking over two distant cities. Each leader remained absorbed in his certainty, oblivious to the fragile human threads now entwined in their wills. Across forests, rivers, and plains, soldiers and civilians felt a subtle tension in the air they could not name. Evening carried the scent of warm earth, wood smoke, and distant water, soft and grounding against the immensity of consequence. Conversations had slowed, pens rested over maps, engines idled in patience. Even the birds seemed hesitant to fly, caught in the hush of a world rearranging itself. The sun leaned lower, stretching shadows into gentle elongations across Berlin and Moscow alike. Decisions made quietly in offices far from the front would ripple through the next days, shaping rivers, roads, and hearts. And as the sky turned violet, the earth itself seemed to exhale, carrying every choice gently toward its inevitable impact. Night settled over the land like a calm tide, soft and unbroken, yet holding the weight of unseen change. The cities slumbered, streets empty, but for occasional soldiers and the distant whistle of a train. In the west, armored divisions rested in patience, engines softening, tracks cooling beneath the stars. To the east, men in the fields and villages lay awake, unaware they were now part of a larger sweep, moved by will far beyond their comprehension. The air smelled faintly of grass, river, and wood smoke, serene yet heavy with promise. Decisions made in distant offices hovered over the land like invisible currents, touching lives with subtle inevitability. The wind moved slowly, brushing against faces, carrying echoes of distant voices and the quiet promise of morning. Even the Dnieper slept, its currents calm, holding the memory of orders and intention beneath its surface. And beneath this gentle night, history itself seemed to pause, waiting for the ripple of events that would soon reach every field, every street, and every heart. The steppe stretched endlessly under a pale sun, dust rising in soft clouds where men and machines moved along indistinct paths. Columns of soldiers and tanks advanced in arcs, the landscape folding gently around them, carrying their weight without complaint. Officers consulted maps, pointing and murmuring to each other, the lines and numbers on paper now alive with meaning. Wind whispered through the grasses, carrying a faint metallic tang that hinted at engines and movement far beyond sight. For the soldiers below, the air seemed heavier, time slowed, each step measured against unseen rhythms. The villages and forests they passed were quiet, as if holding their breath, while the earth itself bent around strategy. Horses stumbled softly over furrows, carts creaked under unseen loads, and the gentle murmur of distant rivers carried across plains. Somewhere far to the north and south, other columns mirrored their motions, closing the circle slowly, like a soft hand pressing inward. And beneath it all, the steppe held its patience, waiting for the inevitable tightening. Soviet units began to notice gaps in their lines, spaces that were impossible to fill, spaces that suggested something larger than the immediate front. Officers spoke in quieter tones, tracing invisible paths across the terrain, trying to anticipate motion they could not yet see. The earth itself seemed to have shifted, shaping hills and valleys into corridors that guided movement almost imperceptibly. Dust rose from each track and boot, curling into slow spirals that merged with the horizon. Soldiers paused to look around, the wind carrying distant sounds of engines and wheels over sand and grass. Each formation was a slow pulse, a heartbeat in a body of geography that now seemed larger than comprehension. Maps were folded and unfolded, notes taken in careful script, each mark a small attempt to wrest control from uncertainty. The sun leaned lower, painting shadows over forests and roads, lengthening the day into a deliberate stretch. Men moved with purpose, but the purpose was soft, cautious, aware that each decision pressed upon them like a gentle weight. And through it all, the land itself guided them, patient and unyielding, toward the inevitable. From the west, German columns arced slowly, their tanks humming in a steady rhythm that carried across the dry fields. The ground seemed to anticipate their passage, dust rising in waves that drifted lazily through the air. Commanders consulted compasses and maps, calculating distances, checking lines, speaking softly to those beside them. Soldiers adjusted their belts, shifted boots, and tightened grips on reins, their motions almost meditative. Wind stirred the grass and the scattered leaves of roadside trees, carrying a scent of dry earth and warmth. Villages lay still, waiting, their chimneys breathing faint smoke into the horizon. Even rivers seemed to bend slightly toward the path of motion, reflecting sunlight that caught on metal and glass. Men walked alongside tanks, boots and treads, leaving shallow impressions that would fade with the next breeze. And in the hush of mid-afternoon, the first hints of enclosure began to take shape across the plains. The circle was forming, subtle but absolute, as if the earth itself conspired in silence. Across the center, Soviet forces shifted, moving along roads and trails, filling what they could, leaving others unguarded by circumstance rather than choice. Officers looked at one another with quiet apprehension, murmuring possibilities, tracing the unknown through their maps. The land seemed to fold against them, guiding their paths and closing spaces without visible hands. Horses pawed the earth, carts groaned, soldiers' boots kicked up dust that rose like smoke, soft and endless. Each motion was deliberate, measured against the unknown, against currents of motion they could feel but not yet name. Messages were sent by courier, disappearing into the wind, never fully arriving, lost in motion. And still, the columns advanced from both sides, arcs bending gently toward the same center, a circle invisible yet inexorably forming. Time itself seemed suspended, stretched by anticipation, every step echoing in the hush of the steppe. And above all, the soldiers continued, unaware of the larger shape being traced by their movements. Each minute, each breath, carried them closer to the tightening. The river Dnieper, wide and reflective, now seemed to mark a boundary that could not be crossed without thought. Bridges trembled softly under the approach of armored columns, their arches holding patiently beneath weight they had not yet felt. Boats lay tethered along banks, small against the expanse, waiting for orders that would never come in time. Men adjusted maps and notes, traced their paths along roads and fields, attempting to reconcile geography with strategy. Dust settled on uniforms and faces, giving each soldier a muted glow, soft and warm, under the late afternoon sun. The wind carried distant sounds, an engine's low hum, the faint creak of wheels, the brushing of grass against boots. Orders moved slowly through units, each instruction folding into hesitation, into careful calculation. And the Dnieper reflected the sky, and the columns alike, patient, calm, witnessing the encirclement as it tightened. All movement was now measured against both river and horizon, against currents of possibility, and beneath it the steppe whispered, gently inevitably, that the trap was almost complete. At dusk, shadows lengthened across the plains, stretching the space between men and movement into gentle uncertainty. Soldiers paused, adjusting gear, sipping water, letting the wind wash over dust and sweat. Maps were folded, unfolded, touched again, tracing paths that seemed to shift under their gaze. The sun, low and soft, cast the earth in golden haze, illuminating tracks and wheels with tender patience. Even the distant hills seemed to lean inward, a subtle guide to unseen corridors, pressing each formation toward the heart of the encirclement. Men spoke quietly, voices soft, hesitant, careful to measure each word. Horses and carts rested, engines idled, the rhythm of life, slowing yet continuing in tandem with the tightening. The air smelled of grass, dust, and warmth, carrying the faint echoes of distant movement across miles of steppe. And through this measured evening, the circle continued to close, its motion steady, imperceptible, inevitable. The world itself seemed to fold around the center of history. Night arrived slowly, the horizon deepening into violet and indigo, stars beginning to prick the sky above the steppe. Soldiers settled along roads and trails, leaning against wheels, crates, and each other, breathing in the cool, still air. The pincer arcs now formed shapes perceptible only from above, silent and absolute, moving gently like hands closing. Fires burned small and distant, their smoke drifting lazily into the night, a muted marker of human presence. Men whispered letters, prayers, names, soft against the hush of the land, each word folding into the quiet. The wind carried distant echoes, a cartwheel, a bird's call, the soft creak of a bridge settling. Commanders traced invisible lines, feeling the weight of the world press against their shoulders, yet speaking only in measured tones. And as the night deepened, the land seemed to hold its breath, patient and eternal, witnessing every quiet movement, every subtle gesture. The encirclement was complete in its inevitability, like the turning of a clock, and all that remained was the slow, soft rhythm of waiting. By the early hours, the steppe was still, the dust settled, and the air cool against faces worn by motion. Soldiers slept in pockets of relief and caution, bodies resting against the quiet hum of engines and the faint whisper of the river. The arcs of movement traced themselves gently into memory, invisible to those caught within, yet absolute in effect. Maps once folded and traced lay open, soft lines of ink marking the tightening, lines that reflected human effort against the indifference of geography. Wind brushed against tents, carts, and horses, carrying the scent of grass and distant earth. The Dnieper gleamed faintly beneath stars, its current slow, eternal, a mirror to the soft inevitability that now held the steppe. Men stirred in sleep, murmuring names, gestures, directions, their dreams threading into the hush, and beneath it all, the earth itself seemed to lean inward, guiding the rhythm of history and the gentle inevitability of the circle. Each breath, each heartbeat, each movement had contributed to this soft completion, and as night deepened, the encirclement lay waiting, quiet and absolute, ready for the day to come. High above the steppe, the world unfolded like a tapestry, soft and endless beneath pale morning light. Planes moved in measured arcs, engines humming a steady, quiet rhythm, almost musical in its repetition. Below, the earth stretched in patterns of fields, rivers, and roads, where men and machines traced the lines of history without realizing their place in it. The wind was thin and cool, carrying the faint scent of metal and distant grass. Shadows of clouds drifted across the plains, elongating rivers and paths in delicate patterns. Pilots spoke in gentle tones over radios, voices calm, almost meditative, their words threading across the vast expanse. Streams of smoke rose far below, muted and slow, carrying the memory of motion through the landscape. The sun glinted off metallic surfaces, soft and unassuming, casting light that was both revealing and gentle. Even from this height, the rhythm of the land spoke, a pulse beneath the war, steady and eternal. And as the planes continued their silent path, the steppe seemed to fold quietly beneath them, vast and patient. From above, the columns of armor and troops traced curves and arcs across the plains, moving with deliberate purpose yet appearing abstract, almost ornamental. Dust rose softly from each track and footstep, curling in invisible spirals that the wind carried lazily along the horizon. The river snaked like a silver ribbon, reflecting sunlight in gentle bursts that moved with the slow current. Bridges lay still beneath arcs of shadow, each one a fragile threshold over water that flowed with quiet patience. Soldiers walked alongside carts and vehicles, tiny shapes in the vast expanse, their motions deliberate, almost hypnotic in rhythm. From the air, distances that once seemed urgent now appeared soft, almost serene, as if the earth had stretched time itself. Clouds mirrored the contours of the land, casting shifting patterns that danced over roads and fields. Even smoke and dust rising from distant skirmishes carried a soft grace in the late morning light, and beneath the gentle hum of engines the steppe breathed quietly, holding all its activity in patient balance. The world below moved with a calm inevitability, both delicate and absolute. Pilots traced paths across the horizon, wings cutting through thin air that smelled faintly of ozone and sun-warmed metal. Their eyes followed distant convoys, noting the slow curves of roads and the shimmer of river surfaces. The plains below were dotted with villages, fields, and forests, each one holding its own quiet rhythm. Despite the movements around it, sunlight fractured across river bends, highlighting small ripples that reflected history in gentle waves. From above, the war seemed composed a pattern of arcs, lines, and motions that only hinted at the urgency felt by those beneath. Soldiers paused along roads, adjusting gear, looking toward horizons they could not comprehend fully. The wind carried the scent of distant earth, dry and fragrant, mixing with the soft hum of the engines. Birds drifted across the sky, indifferent to the paths traced by man and machine below. And in this quiet distance, the beauty of motion was almost hypnotic, even as the shadow of consequence lingered beneath. The sky held the day gently, as if cradling every step of history. Below, the riverbanks curved softly, water reflecting the sky's changing light in gentle patterns. Tiny boats rested at edges, some abandoned, others awaiting instructions that would arrive too late. Bridges, delicate in proportion to the water, arched silently, carrying weight that the river bore patiently. Soldiers walked along paths and roads, their movements folded into the vastness, almost imperceptible from this height. Dust rose in lazy spirals from the columns, merging with the wind in soft trails that seemed to mark the passage of time itself. Trees stood quietly along the roads, their leaves brushing against each other in a calm murmur. Carts and wagons creaked slowly, a soft accompaniment to the hum of distant engines. The sun leaned westward, softening shadows, elongating forms in the gentle light. And beneath it all, the river, the roads and the fields held their calm, a patient audience to the patterns above. Time seemed to stretch, carrying both motion and stillness in equal measure. Clouds drifted slowly, their shadows sliding across plains and forests, bringing the world beneath into gentle relief. Convoys traced arcs beneath them, moving like quiet streams of thought across the land. The wind whispered softly over fields, carrying the faint scent of earth, wood, and dust. Horses and men moved in rhythms, shaped by both command and terrain, their motions folded into the landscape like soft brushstrokes. Metallic glints marked vehicles and helmets, reflecting sunlight that changed with each passing moment. Villages rested quietly along paths, chimneys breathing faint smoke into the expansive calm. Streams and rivers mirrored the sky, shifting from silver to gold as the sun leaned lower. Even the distant mountains softened into haze, blending the boundaries between earth and sky, and as the plains traced their paths, the world beneath seemed both serene and fragile, holding its rhythm with quiet dignity. Each breath of wind, each flicker of shadow carried the gentle weight of history onward. The sun dropped lower, turning rivers and roads to molten gold that reflected the sky's deepening hues. Pilots adjusted their formations, the hum of engines now soft against the quiet of descending evening. Below, soldiers paused along roadsides, some standing, some leaning against vehicles, sensing the pull of dusk. Even without understanding the sky above, dust settled slowly, mingling with smoke and the faint scent of earth warmed by the day. Trees and villages appeared softened by distance, shapes almost dreamlike in the fading light. Bridges reflected the sun's final warmth, their arches stretching across water that seemed patient and eternal. Birds drifted lazily, unhurried, indifferent to the movement below, their wings tracing gentle arcs through the sky. Soldiers whispered names, numbers, and destinations, voices muted against the vastness. And above, the planes glided, tracing silent paths across the horizon, their presence a calm hum in the expanse of light. The steppe beneath waited, steady, as though it understood the balance between motion and pause. Evening deepened into violet and soft indigo, stars beginning to pierce the fading light, scattered across the vast dome above. Planes continued to move with quiet purpose, their wings catching the last glimmer of sun. Below, the land had slowed, roads and rivers resting in shadows, the dust settling in the calm air. Soldiers leaned against carts and vehicles, eyes tracing distant movements. Ears tuned to subtle sounds carried on the wind. Rivers reflected the stars faintly, each ripple a whisper of motion folded into eternity. Trees whispered in the evening breeze, carrying scents of damp earth and grass, softened by the cool night. Even the distant forests seemed to lean inward, holding their quiet, as if aware of the motion above. The steppe stretched endlessly, a gentle canvas for both light and shadow, motion and stillness. And in this quiet, the air itself seemed to cradle the world beneath, holding it with calm patience. The planes traced their paths silently, carrying history softly across the expanse. Night settled fully, cool and gentle, the world beneath held in calm shadow. Stars reflected faintly in the river, and the air smelled of earth, grass, and distant wood smoke. Soldiers slept quietly where they rested, blankets and dust blending into soft textures beneath their bodies. Vehicles cooled slowly, engines humming the faint memory of motion into the still air. The wind moved gently through trees, brushing grass, carrying whispers of motion far below. Above, the plains traced arcs that seemed almost timeless, floating with the rhythm of the stars themselves. Rivers, roads, and fields rested in the soft folds of night, the steppe holding all motion and pause alike. Even distant hills and forests softened into shadow, gentle and unassuming in the calm. And in that quiet, the world felt suspended, balanced between beauty and the weight of unfolding events. As the night deepened, the air above the steppe carried the soft hum of life, moving gently toward tomorrow. The forest stood silent under the pale glow of evening, its trees stretching skyward, leaves whispering softly in the faint wind. Shadows settled between trunks, long and still, hiding men who moved quietly, carefully, each step deliberate against the moss and fallen leaves. Fires burned low in shallow pits, smoke curling gently into the night, carrying warmth and a faint scent of pine. Voices were soft, careful, words exchanged in whispers that might as well have been carried by the wind alone. Soldiers leaned against trees, boots pressing into soft earth, hands adjusting coats or maps, folded so many times they were nearly a single sheet. Water trickled from a nearby stream, faint and continuous, a quiet rhythm beneath the rustle of the forest. Notes, letters, or small gestures passed between men, almost invisible in their delicacy, connecting them without disturbance. Each breath was measured, each glance deliberate, as though the trees themselves demanded quiet attention. Night deepened gradually, stretching shadows across roots and underbrush, softening the world into muted tones, and through it all, the forest seemed to hold them gently, an unseen guardian over the fragile pulse of survival. Small fires cast flickering halos, painting faces with the warm glow of fleeting security. The smell of burning pine mixed with earth, a grounding presence against the uncertainty pressing in from the edges of the woods. Men whispered of home, of letters left unsent, of meals long missed, weaving memory into the hush. Some shifted on blankets, knees pressed to chests, watching sparks drift upward, carried silently by the cool air. A bird called far above, its voice threading through branches, gentle and untethered. Maps worn and faded, rested nearby, lines tracing rivers and roads that now seemed distant, almost abstract. Even in stillness, the forest seemed alive, leaves quivering in the faintest draught, roots stretching quietly beneath them. Each moment was a soft expansion, holding anxiety, patience, and hope together without urgency. The men adjusted their positions, small movements absorbed by the earth and leaves beneath, and the night continued its slow, careful watch over the fragile hush. Branches swayed as distant winds whispered along the canopy, carrying scents of damp soil and pine resin. Soldiers listened, attuned to every faint crack or rustle, learning to distinguish between the ordinary and the unusual. Fires flared briefly as someone shifted logs, then softened again into long orange breaths that mirrored the patience of the men. Some murmured plans in low tones, quiet calculations against the uncertain path ahead. Boots pressed into soft mud, water dripping from leaves, a gentle accompaniment to murmured conversation. Letters, scratched hastily on scraps of paper, were folded and pressed into pockets, treasures of memory amid impermanence. The forest floor absorbed the weight of bodies, the quiet rhythm of breathing, the soft movements of waiting. Each man felt the slow passage of time differently, yet all shared the same suspended heartbeat of the night. Shadows deepened beneath the trunks, stretching into corners where sleep and vigilance intertwined. And beneath it all, the forest held steady, as though patient enough to wait for the next movement. Water ran quietly along small streams, glinting faintly under the pale moonlight that filtered between branches. Soldiers knelt at the edges, cupping it in hands, drinking slowly, tasting the cold earth in its softness. Conversation had dwindled to murmurs, voices softened by fatigue and careful attention to the surrounding hush. Some traced lines on maps with fingers, imagining routes that might never be taken, pathways suspended in quiet possibility. The smell of wood smoke lingered in the air, warm and grounding against the damp coolness of the soil. Rustling leaves, shifting shadows, and distant calls of nocturnal birds wove into a gentle rhythm that steadied frayed thoughts. Small gestures of comfort passed between men, a shared blanket, a whisper, a reassuring hand, each absorbed by the stillness. Even gear and packs were set with deliberate care, every object placed softly to avoid drawing attention. And the forest seemed to breathe with them, its patience infinite, its silence protective. Night stretched endlessly, a slow canopy under which survival felt tangible, yet fleeting. Voices became almost ghosts, echoing softly against trunks and leaves, carrying memory more than information. Men recalled faint fragments of meals, laughter and letters long unseen, their words threading lightly through the hush. The wind carried a faint scent of distant smoke, dry leaves, and cold earth, reminding them of the steppe beyond. Boots pressed into moss, fingers traced the texture of bark, the simplest touch grounding against the tension, pressing softly at the edges. Fires smoldered, throwing shadows that moved with a quiet rhythm, folding the men into their glow. Streams whispered endlessly, a patient companion to the hush of conversation and movement. Each breath was counted, slow, deliberate, a soft anchor against uncertainty. Even the occasional owl's call seemed to pass without alarm, a witness to the careful stillness. And in this intimacy, The forest seemed to hold every sound, every whisper, and every heartbeat in its gentle embrace. The night carried them onward, quiet and slow, toward the fragile hours yet to come. Some soldiers closed their eyes, leaning against trunks or the earth, drifting in short moments of rest. Dreams were tentative, stitched together from memory, and faint hopes, carried along the soft current of wind and leaf. Others remained alert, tracing unseen sounds with attention, listening to the gentle rhythm of the forest and distant currents. The scent of pine resin deepened as darkness thickened, mingling with soil, smoke, and a faint trace of cold air. Fingers traced edges of maps, pens hovered in still hands, decisions folded into quiet consideration. The hush of leaves, the soft patter of dew beginning to form, and the slow breathing of men created a gentle cadence. Shadows softened as fires dimmed, embers glowing faintly before sinking into the night. Every small sound became significant. A drop of water, a rustle, a whisper, each folded into awareness without urgency. And the forest, ancient and patient, received them all, carrying each moment quietly into the waiting hours. The men slept lightly, held in its calm, as though suspended between breaths of history. Branches brushed softly against each other as a faint breeze moved through the canopy, carrying stories that no one spoke aloud. Soldiers stirred, whispering names, reciting faint prayers, tracing invisible patterns of hope and fear. Fires remained low, glowing like scattered hearts across the dark earth, each flame a soft guardian. The scent of wet earth, pine and smoke intertwined, grounding each movement in sensation rather than thought. Maps were folded, notes tucked carefully into pockets, gestures of order in a world suspended between paths. Shadows danced quietly across trunks, elongated by the soft flicker of embers, creating gentle rhythms that mirrored the pulse of waiting men. Water trickled endlessly along unseen streams, its constant whispering blending with the slow murmur of voices. Each breath was a quiet act of persistence, each step a measured choice in the soft tension of night, and the forest carried them onward, a gentle cradle of patience, until the faint promise of morning hinted beyond the horizon. In its hush the world felt both infinite and intimate, holding each man quietly in its care. By the first hints of dawn, the forest remained still, dew collecting softly on leaves and branches. Fires had smoldered to embers, smoke curling upward and fading into the pale light. Soldiers stretched, whispered gently, and adjusted their positions. The world around them slow and patient. The scent of wet earth, pine and cooling smoke marked the quiet continuity of night into day. Streams reflected early light in tiny glimmers, carrying echoes of wind motion and whispers downstream. Leaves rustled softly as birds awoke, their songs gentle and unhurried, threading through the hushed trees. Men moved carefully, preparing for another day, guided by patience more than urgency, each breath measured against the forest's rhythm. Even distant hills and valleys held their hush, softening the transition from night to day, and the forest, timeless and steady, remained a gentle witness to every quiet heartbeat, every whispered word, and every careful step. It held the men in its calm, carrying them forward into the next chapter of waiting and survival. East of Kiev, the steppe folded quietly beneath the relentless motion of armored columns, their arcs converging with a rhythm both patient and unstoppable. Soldiers noticed gaps closing, roads narrowing under unseen pressure, and a subtle tension settled in the air like the gentle weight of evening. Officers whispered urgent orders, voices soft but trembling, tracing impossible paths across the terrain with fingers on faded maps. Dust rose in curling spirals from feet and wheels, drifting slowly over fields that had seen the passage of countless armies before. Horses shifted uneasily, sensing the tightening without understanding its reason. The wind carried faint echoes of commands and murmurs, weaving them into the hush of the landscape. Streams reflected pale sunlight, moving calmly despite the restlessness pressing around them. And even as the earth itself seemed to bend under motion, the world held its patience, waiting for each decision to ripple outward. Soldiers pressed on, hearts quickened in quiet disbelief, yet the steppe continued its unhurried rhythm, and beneath it all inevitability stretched like dusk across plains and rivers alike. Attempts to reorganize met only subtle resistance. Roads choked by slow-moving columns, leaving men caught between the arcs of motion. Officers scanned horizons, tracing lines of approach that bent gently toward each other, mapping the impossible with quiet resignation. The hum of engines and soft creak of wheels carried over the plains, constant and unhurried, almost musical in their repetition. Soldiers paused briefly, adjusting gear, shifting boots, leaning on soft earth, the dust clinging to uniforms and faces alike. Conversations dwindled to murmurs, the weight of impossibility folding over each word. Trees along roadsides stood patient, shadows stretching long across paths, indifferent to the motions beneath. Streams wound lazily through the steppe, reflecting pale sunlight in gentle currents, each ripple a quiet witness. Even the faint scent of pine and grass carried calm through the air, contrasting the tension, pressing softly on hearts. And as each moment passed, the encirclement took shape more clearly, subtle yet complete, pressing gently like a slow tide. The world beneath the pale sky seemed to bend toward the inevitable, patient and unchanging. Whispers traveled along the lines, carrying names, directions, and fragments of hope, each thread delicate against the hush. Soldiers traced the distant arcs of movement, attempting to anticipate shifts that had already been mapped in invisible patterns above them. Dust mingled with sweat and the faint scent of earth, forming a soft haze that blurred motion into gentle rhythms. The hum of engines continued, steady and unhurried, a subtle reminder of the forces pressing inward. Horses pawed lightly at soft soil, carts creaked with delicate sound, every note absorbed into the quiet expanse. Men looked toward the horizon, sensing arcs converging without fully understanding their meaning. Conversations and gestures became smaller, more precise. Each step weighed against the fragile hope of escape. The sun leaned westward, softening shadows, elongating every figure, every tree, and every column of movement. Streams and rivers mirrored the sky's pale gold, flowing with calm inevitability. And beneath this gentle unfolding, the noose drew tighter, silent and absolute. Attempts to break free stretched across roads and fields, faint and fleeting, moving like whispers through the vastness. Columns shifted, halted, then pressed forward again, tracing arcs that folded against each other, softly but firmly. Officers consulted maps in measured tones, speaking in careful language that carried the weight of desperation without urgency. Dust rose in soft spirals from boots and wheels, mingling with the wind and drifting lazily over the steppe. Soldiers adjusted equipment, whispered names of home, traced faint paths of memory across terrain they would soon leave behind. Horses and carts moved with deliberate slowness, every motion folding into the quiet rhythm of the encirclement. Streams reflected pale light, moving as if untouched by the pressing arcs of men and machines. Trees leaned slightly with the wind, leaves brushing softly against one another in calm accompaniment, and the horizon itself seemed to fold inward, pressing gently, like the slow descent of evening across plains and rivers. The air carried a hush that balanced fear and patience with quiet inevitability. Voices softened as the sun dipped lower, shadows stretching long across fields and roads. Men moved with careful precision, every gesture deliberate, every whisper measured. Dust and smoke mingled in gentle spirals, tracing the subtle pulse of engines and wheels across the steppe. Officers folded maps, retraced lines, and exchanged quiet notes, the language of hope shrinking into small fragments. Soldiers adjusted coats, boots, and gear, the faint scrape of movement absorbed by the earth beneath them. Streams flowed steadily, reflecting pale orange sunlight, indifferent to the tension pressing softly on the land. Horses shivered, small noises punctuating the hush like quiet reminders of life, and all around, the steppe seemed to inhale and exhale slowly, holding the world in patient balance. Men felt the tightening in the earth beneath, in the air above, in the rhythm of distant motion, and in the fading light inevitability stretched like a slow, soft sigh over the encirclement. As dusk deepened, the first cool breath of evening passed over fields and rivers, brushing against faces weary from the day's endless motion. Soldiers paused along paths, boots pressing softly into soil, whispering quietly, listening intently to the subtle sounds of the land. Dust settled gently, covering carts, wheels, and uniforms alike, softening the harsh edges of movement. Streams and rivulets reflected the deepening violet sky, flowing with calm consistency, as though they too bore witness to the tightening. Horses moved carefully, heads lowered, ears twitching at the faintest hint of motion beyond sight. Conversations dwindled to whispers of names, prayers, and faint hopes, folded into the cool air. Officers retraced invisible arcs in the air with quiet gestures, careful to disturb nothing, mindful of unseen pressures converging. Trees leaned with the wind, leaves brushing in hushed rhythm, accompanying the quiet pulse of the night. And beneath it all, the steppe held the soldiers in patient embrace, aware of their smallness within the arcs of history. Each breath, each heartbeat, carried them gently toward the stillness of night. Night settled fully, soft and cool, the steppe absorbing motion into the hush of darkness. Soldiers rested where they could, leaning on earth, vehicles, or each other, eyes half closed against the fatigue pressing gently. Fires had burned low, embers glowing faintly, each a small guardian against the vastness of shadow. Streams whispered endlessly in the background, carrying reflections of moonlight and stars downstream. Horses shifted softly, boots adjusted quietly, tents settling into the calm of night. Dust mingled with the cooling air, the faint scent of grass, earth, and distant smoke blending into a muted memory. Maps rested folded, lines softened by the hush, every plan and hope suspended within gentle inevitability. The arcs of men and machines had pressed close, folding the steppe into a quiet tension that could be felt but not named. And above it, the stars reflected faintly in rivers, roads, and eyes alike, gentle witnesses to motion and pause. Beneath the calm night, the noose remained, patient and inevitable, awaiting the slow unfolding of dawn. By early morning, the landscape rested in soft violet light, dew collecting quietly on grass and leaves. Soldiers stirred gently, whispering softly, preparing for the next day with measured care. The dust had settled, wheels and boots, leaving faint impressions that would vanish in time. Streams reflected the new light, calm and unhurried, a subtle companion to the steppe's patient rhythm. Horses moved carefully, shifting weight, sniffing the air, their movements absorbed into the hush. Embers from night fires had cooled, leaving only faint traces of warmth and memory. Trees swayed gently with the morning breeze, holding the weight of shadow and light alike. And in this soft awakening, the soldiers felt the pressure of tightening arcs, of impossibilities, folding into paths they could not escape. The world itself seemed to breathe slowly, carrying inevitability quietly across plains, rivers, and roads. And as the day began, the noose remained close, patient and absolute, guiding the story gently toward its next chapter. The winter light fell gently over the streets of Moscow, pale and soft against the frozen roofs, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke and cold stone. Inside government offices, men sat quietly around tables, papers and maps spread before them, like delicate whispers of possibility. Conversations were measured, voices low, each word folded carefully into the air as if it could shatter the fragile calm. Stalin's presence pressed softly, but undeniably, a weight that made every gesture deliberate, every pause meaningful. Clocks ticked steadily, marking time that felt slower than usual, stretching the moments into long, careful intervals. Outside, the wind carried faint sounds of the city, the soft crunch of boots on snow, the distant hum of life, moving in rhythm with the frozen day. Generals leaned forward, fingers tracing invisible lines on maps, murmuring quiet assessments that sought attention, but often received only silence. The chill of unspoken disbelief hung between them, heavy and still, yet almost imperceptible. Even the paper under their hands seemed to absorb the tension, rustling softly with every careful adjustment. And through it all, the silence persisted, patient and absolute, a gentle presence shaping the room. The reports arrived slowly, carried by couriers, and whispered over the lines of telephone wires. Each note contained numbers, positions, and observations that might have demanded swift movement, yet found only quiet eyes and careful hands. Men traced their fingers along maps, noting towns, rivers, and roads, soft arcs that hinted at impossible gaps. Outside, the city remained calm, snow brushing rooftops, trees shivering softly in the wind, oblivious to the tension inside. Generals exchanged measured glances, the subtle rise and fall of shoulders, conveying more than words ever could. Each piece of information folded delicately into thought, assessed then left untouched, suspended like frost on a branch. Stalin's gaze lingered, still and unyielding, quiet as the winter sky above the city. Breaths were slow, deliberate, as though the room itself held its patience in careful measure. Even the hum of distant traffic and footsteps carried a muted rhythm, absorbed into the hush of the chamber, and beneath it all the silence remained, a quiet force shaping history without a single spoken word. Time moved gently, yet inexorably, stretching minutes into hours, as decisions lingered unresolved. Generals whispered softly, papers shifted under careful fingers, pens hovered above maps, poised for notes that would come too late. The cold air from frost-laced windows crept across floors and chairs, brushing against shoulders, stiffening movements and sharpening focus. Outside, distant church bells rang slowly, each toll a soft reminder of the passage of time beyond the room. Notes of dispatch carried faintly through corridors, footsteps echoing lightly over polished floors, absorbed into the hush. Maps bore traces of tracing fingers, lines drawn and erased in quiet indecision, folding potential paths into gentle ambiguity. The warm scent of tea lingered in the air, almost imperceptible against the sharper scent of cold stone and wood. Even as the generals waited, aware of urgency pressing softly on them, no word arrived to disturb the calm, measured by silence. The stillness inside mirrored the frozen city outside, patient, quiet, and heavy with potential. And in that long pause, history itself seemed to inhale, waiting for the moment when sound would finally break the hush. Couriers moved like shadows, slipping through corridors with muted steps, papers folded carefully in their hands. Each note held warnings, positions, and cautions that might have guided action, yet were met only with soft acknowledgement. The generals exchanged subtle gestures, each hand motion, each nod measured, delicate, restrained. Outside, smoke rose lazily from chimneys, blending with the frost in the pale morning light. Snow drifted across windowsills, brushing softly against stone, a gentle rhythm that contrasted the tension inside. Pens hovered above paper, then lowered again, decisions deferred, held in suspended anticipation. The faint hum of conversation in adjoining offices reached them, absorbed quietly into the hush of the room. Even the chairs beneath their weight seemed to participate, groaning softly under movement, yet contributing to the slow, deliberate rhythm. And beneath it all, the silence deepened, folding uncertainty, authority, and patience into one unbroken note. Each breath carried weight, each heartbeat a soft drum marking the slow passage toward consequence. Letters and coded messages arrived in succession, a gentle river of information flowing into the quiet chamber. Each paper traced a path across the desk, a gentle record of forces moving far away, unseen and yet profoundly present. Generals adjusted coats, shifted in chairs, fingers tracing faint lines on maps that seemed to whisper possibilities they could not command. The cold light outside softened shadows, stretching the room's stillness into long contemplative shapes. The subtle scent of ink, paper, and polished wood mingled with the faint warmth of breath and clothing. Eyes moved slowly across documents, registering facts that should have inspired movement, yet elicited only the careful hush. The wind brushed against windows, carrying muted sounds of life beyond, birds stirring softly and distant bells tolling. Even the clock seemed to measure its passage with extra care, each tick deliberate, almost conversational. And in this quiet, the room held its own weight, patient and firm, a slow container of thought and hesitation. Time stretched, folded and lingered, carrying the hushed tension toward the point of breaking. Generals spoke in whispers at intervals, their words cautious, almost fragile, folding softly into attentive ears. Stalin listened, still and patient, a quiet presence that shaped the room without disturbance. Each assessment was measured, each suggestion weighed in silence before fading into thought. Outside, the frost clung to the streets and trees, delicate as lace, a quiet observer to the tension within. Snow muffled distant sounds, softening footsteps and voices into gentle echoes that mingled with the hush inside. The hum of heating, the faint rustle of papers, the delicate creak of chairs contributed a soft rhythm to the stillness. Every gesture was deliberate, every breath conscious, as if even small movements might ripple outward into consequence. The light shifted gently across desks and maps, illuminating faint textures, lines and folds that spoke of movement suspended. And beneath it all, the silence held its form, unbroken, patient, yet bearing the weight of outcomes yet unseen. In this long quiet, the day itself seemed to slow, measuring each decision with infinite care. Minutes turned slowly into hours, the day unfolding under soft winter light that glimmered through frost-laced windows. Generals adjusted posture, folded papers, murmured quietly among themselves, their voices almost absorbed by the calm. The cold brushed against sleeves, collars, and skin, a subtle reminder of the outside world and its indifferent rhythm. Maps remained spread, lines traced by careful fingers, showing movements that had already begun elsewhere beyond command. Smoke from distant chimneys curled in soft spirals, merging with shadows that stretched across polished floors. Pens moved lightly across paper, words forming and disappearing in gentle hesitation. The wind outside brushed softly against structures, a quiet accompaniment to the weight inside. Even the clock seemed to mark time in a measured pulse, careful not to disturb the hush. And in this deliberate suspension, the generals waited, held by silence, carrying the burden of knowing yet unwilling to confront it fully. The day leaned gently into evening, still patient, still quiet, still unavoidable. By nightfall, the city had softened into muted tones, lights glowing faintly against snow-dusted streets. Inside, the chamber remained hushed, papers stacked, pens resting, maps pressed gently under weight of thought. Stalin's presence persisted, quiet and unwavering, a still force shaping every breath, every pause. Generals rested arms on tables, faces reflecting patience, fatigue, and subtle unease. Outside, smoke drifted lazily from chimneys, blending with pale starlight and drifting frost. A gentle rhythm of life continuing despite tension. The hum of distant traffic and footsteps carried softly into the building, absorbed quietly into the calm. Even the air seemed heavier, laden with thought and restraint, almost tangible in its silence. Decisions remained suspended, the quiet of authority shaping history without declaration. And beneath the hush, the world waited, holding the consequences of inaction in patient stillness. In Moscow that night, the silence itself became a presence, gentle, cold, and inexorably shaping the days to come. The encircled armies moved like shadows across the steppe, bodies weary, boots pressing into soft, churned earth, leaving tracks that would vanish in time. Soldiers whispered to one another in quiet tones, murmurs carrying fragments of hope, stories of home, and brief reassurances that seemed almost fragile in the vastness. Fires burned low in shallow pits, their smoke drifting lazily into the cold sky, carrying warmth that was both comfort and reminder of scarcity. Water from nearby streams flowed steadily, cold and patient, offering sustenance in tiny measured sips. Horses shivered in the chill, their breath curling in small clouds, a soft rhythm to the murmurs of men. Letters, notes, and keepsakes were pressed close, fragments of memory carried gently amid the pressing weight of the present. Even the wind moved slowly, brushing across fields and trenches, softening dust and footprints into delicate patterns. Soldiers paused at intervals, adjusting gear, sharing quiet words, and tracing lines on worn maps with careful fingers. The landscape stretched endlessly, carrying both the weight of isolation and the fragile pulse of endurance. And beneath it all, the earth held them softly, patient and unjudging. The fires cast gentle, flickering light over faces lined with fatigue, eyes bright with quiet determination despite exhaustion. Every movement was deliberate, each gesture measured against the limited strength remaining in bodies pressed hard against circumstance. Dust rose from soft paths, mingling with smoke in slow spirals that floated gently into the cold, pale sky. Soldiers drank sparingly from streams, tasting the faint scent of earth and pine. Each sip a small victory against fatigue. Conversations were whispered, names and faint memories exchanged in low tones that carried quietly over the hush of the encirclement. Carts and horses shifted gently, the subtle creak of wood and leather absorbed into the rhythm of patient endurance. Maps lay open, lines traced by trembling fingers, pathways imagined and reimagined in silence. The sun leaned toward the horizon, casting soft golden light across the worn fields, highlighting shapes and movements in gentle contrast. And through it all, men persisted, moving forward, not in hope of escape, but in quiet assertion of presence within the inevitable. Each breath, each step, folded softly into the rhythm of survival, carrying them gently toward the coming night. The circling forces traced soft arcs across the landscape, pressing with inevitability, yet leaving moments of stillness between movements. Soldiers huddled in small groups, sharing warmth, murmuring prayers, recounting stories of distant villages and long-forgotten meals. Smoke from fires mingled with dust, drifting in lazy spirals that carried scents of earth, sweat, and wood across the quiet expanse. Water flowed slowly, reflecting the shifting light of a sky that seemed indifferent to the pressures below. Boots pressed into soft earth, leaving temporary marks that would vanish with wind and rain, whispers of existence in the vastness. Letters and small tokens passed hand to hand, a fragile current of memory threading through the hush. Even the wind seemed slowed, brushing against trees, leaves, and the edges of shallow trenches with gentle persistence. Soldiers adjusted positions, leaning on horses, carts, or each other, every movement deliberate and absorbing, and beneath it all, the steppe held them with quiet patience, absorbing fatigue, whispers, and the soft pulse of endurance. The day leaned gently toward evening, carrying its soft weight into the encircled night. Eyes traced horizons that offered no escape. Landscapes folding softly into each other, gentle arcs of hill and river, pressing invisibly against motion. Soldiers spoke in murmurs, recounting faint glimmers of memory and fragments of routine that carried them through the pressing hours. Fires flickered low, casting gentle light over faces that were both weary and determined, tracing lines of shadow and soft warmth. Streams continued their steady flow, the sound of water, a constant companion against the quiet rhythm of tired bodies. Dust mixed with smoke and moisture, drifting lazily over paths, creating delicate patterns that held the memory of movement. Horses and carts shifted softly, their small sounds blending seamlessly with whispers and the hum of wind across fields. Letters, keepsakes, and folded papers were pressed close, each a tether to home and to life outside the circle. Even the sky seemed muted, clouds stretched thin, carrying light in soft, even tones that balanced the pressing stillness below. And through this slow pulse of endurance, men moved deliberately, step by step, breath by breath, quietly asserting presence against the inevitability surrounding them. Each motion was both small and immense, a testament to resilience, folded into patience. Night descended gently, soft and cold, carrying with it a hush that settled across men, horses, and landscape alike. Fires glowed faintly, embers breathing against the darkness, each flicker a heartbeat in the stillness. Soldiers whispered prayers or names of distant towns, each word a soft thread linking the present to memory. Streams reflected faint moonlight, glimmering quietly beneath trees and trenches, a companion to the fragile light of endurance. Horses shifted slowly, their breaths visible in the cold, mingling with soft murmurs of men adjusting blankets, coats, and packs. Dust and smoke mingled into a delicate haze, drifting through the encircled space like a gentle veil. Maps lay open, lines traced and retraced by careful fingers, routes imagined in a world that no longer offered choice. Even the wind moved quietly, brushing leaves, grass, and earth in calm rhythm, carrying whispers across fields. And beneath this soft canopy of night, men continued to endure, every step, every breath, every small act of persistence, threaded gently into the long night. The circle tightened softly around them, absolute yet patient, bearing witness to the quiet fire within. Breath and heartbeat became intertwined with the hush of night, measured and steady despite fatigue. Soldiers adjusted positions, whispered quietly, and traced faint paths on worn maps, their gestures slow and deliberate. Fires burned low, casting shadows that moved lazily across, faces etched with determination and exhaustion. Streams and rivulets flowed softly, their gentle murmur accompanying whispered stories and prayers carried through the hush. Horses and carts shifted with the faintest sounds, each motion absorbed by the gentle rhythm of the encirclement. Letters and keepsakes passed from hand to hand, each a fragment of memory pressed carefully into the present. Dust mingled with smoke and soft moisture, drifting slowly, marking the passage of time with delicate arcs. Even the trees leaned gently in the night wind, their leaves brushing softly against one another, providing rhythm to the stillness below. And in this slow, measured endurance, men asserted their presence quietly, like a soft song within a vast silence. Each heartbeat and breath carried the quiet fire onward, folding hope into patience, presence into inevitability. Dawn approached gradually, pale light brushing the tops of trees, hills, and distant rivers. Soldiers stirred gently, adjusting blankets, whispering names, and moving with careful precision against the cool earth. Fires glowed faintly, their warmth soft against the chill of early morning. Streams reflected the emerging light, flowing steadily, carrying whispers of night and hints of the day to come. Dust settled over paths, carts, and horses, a soft layer absorbing the weight of movement and rest alike. Conversations remained low, murmured in careful tones, voices threading through the hush like soft currents. Maps and papers were folded and pressed gently into packs, plans imagined, recalculated, or deferred in the quiet. Horses shifted slowly, ears twitching, breaths curling in the cold air, merging rhythmically with the soft murmurs of men. And beneath the gentle light of dawn, the encircled soldiers persisted, the quiet fire within carrying them softly through the final hours. The day stretched forward, slow and deliberate, holding their endurance gently in its patient arms. Sunlight rose fully, soft and diffused, warming frozen earth and lingering over low fires, embers, and weary faces. Soldiers moved with the deliberate rhythm of exhaustion, adjusting equipment and whispering quietly, each motion small yet significant. Streams flowed steadily, reflecting light that carried both warmth and clarity into the landscape. Dust and smoke lingered in gentle swirls, marking paths already traveled, and those imagined. Horses shifted carefully, their breath blending with soft murmurs and low, comforting sounds of human presence. Letters, keepsakes, and folded papers remained close, reminders of distant life and enduring memory. Even the trees seemed softened by light, their leaves brushing gently, accompanying the quiet persistence of men below. And in this calm, slow unfolding, the encircled armies moved forward, each step a testament to endurance, courage, and the subtle fire that persisted despite all. The steppe held them gently, patient, and still, carrying the echoes of their quiet struggle onward. The circle remained absolute, but within it burned a soft, unwavering flame of human presence. The streets of Kiev stretched quiet beneath a sky that seemed to have dimmed with sorrow, the air thick with the scent of smoke and cold stone. Buildings leaned gently against one another, some scarred, some broken, their windows reflecting pale light like watchful eyes. Civilians moved slowly, shuffling along pathways once familiar, pausing to trace a finger along a doorframe or wall. now scarred by movement and pressure. Dust settled softly on abandoned carts and scattered belongings, covering them with the hush of time and absence. Horses shifted uneasily in empty courtyards, their soft breaths curling in the cool air, a rhythm to the stillness around them. From distant streets, faint sounds of movement traveled slowly, ghost-like and almost musical, carrying echoes of passages once filled with life. Children sat quietly on steps, holding dolls and toys, their small fingers tracing worn wood and stone, clinging to memory amid uncertainty. Fires glowed faintly in shallow pits, embers soft and patient, sending gentle spirals of warmth into the chilled air. And above all, the city seemed to exhale, a quiet pulse beneath the layers of dust, smoke, and memory. The day leaned toward evening, with gentle inevitability, carrying the city softly into night. Windows shattered or missing reflected the pale, fading sunlight, each jagged edge catching light like fragments of thought. Streets meandered through rubble, soft curves of destruction, folding gently into familiar paths. Civilians moved with quiet deliberation, eyes tracing the ruins around them, hands brushing over walls and fences with gentle reverence. Horses shifted against the pull of time, their coats brushed by wind carrying the scent of distant smoke and ash. Doors hung askew, whispering softly as they swayed, the gentle motion a lullaby for those moving slowly through the city. Fires burned low, sending soft orange light across cobbled streets, blending with the deepening shadows. A few voices rose in whispers, conversations delicate as threads weaving through the quiet, sharing news, memories, and cautious hope. Dust mingled with the faint scent of burned wood and cold stone, forming a haze that softened edges and softened perception. Even the distant clatter of movement carried a muted rhythm, absorbed into the hush of the city, and beneath it all, Kiev seemed to hold its breath, patient, still, and quiet in its fall. People traced familiar paths, now rearranged by pressure and passage, their steps slow and deliberate across uneven streets. Windows and doors bore soft marks of passage, each scratch and crack holding whispers of what had been and what was leaving behind. Children clung gently to small belongings, toys or scraps of cloth, carrying fragments of home as their footsteps carried them softly through debris. Horses nuzzled abandoned carts, shifting weight quietly against the cobbled stones, exhaling small clouds into the cold air. Fires in shallow pits glowed warmly, the embers lifting delicate smoke that spiraled in slow, mesmerizing arcs. Voices whispered softly along streets, in courtyards over cracked pavements, sharing memory and observation in measured tones. The wind brushed along walls and rooftops, carrying dust, ash, and faint scents of smoke and earth in gentle currents. Every motion seemed to merge with the rhythm of the city, slow, measured, almost like a heartbeat beneath the collapse. And even in the midst of loss, a quiet dignity persisted in the people moving softly through streets. Once familiar, Kiev leaned into night gradually, wrapping its silence around every corner and shadow. From the riverbank, soft reflections shimmered across the surface of the Dnieper, pale light stretching gently over the water. Streets beyond the river curved into shadows, their lines softened by smoke and distance, carrying whispers of steps along broken paths. Civilians walked slowly, tracing faint impressions of roads that had guided them before, pausing to touch a wall, a fence, or the corner of a familiar building. Horses shifted, hooves stirring soft dust, their breath curling into the cold air, as a quiet rhythm of life persisted. Fires glowed faintly among ruined structures, embers lifting gentle smoke into the calm, deepening sky. Conversations were low, measured, soft, threads of presence woven delicately through the hush, offering both warning and comfort. Dust and ash settled lightly on cobblestones and rooftops, softening the contours of the city, blending ruin into gentle memory. Even the faint movement of distant troops carried the cadence of ghost-like steps, echoes absorbed into streets and alleys. And beneath the weight of destruction, the city seemed to fold inward, holding memories in a quiet, tender embrace. Evening settled with a delicate hush, softening the pulse of a city that had once thrummed with life. Shops and markets were silent, shelves bearing the faint scent of dust, their goods long moved or abandoned. Signs hung askew, swinging gently in the wind, whispers of language brushing softly against the ears of those passing. Children traced footprints in the dust, small fingers touching walls, doors and stones marking presence in the hushed world around them. Horses shifted uneasily, brushing against remnants of carts and barrels, small movements absorbed into the quiet rhythm. Fires in shallow pits sent soft spirals of smoke into twilight, each flicker a reminder of warmth, fragility, and persistence. Whispered names passed between civilians, stories folded into hushed tones that drifted along empty streets. Dust and ash settled slowly, softening every edge, absorbing the traces of motion like gentle memory. Even distant footsteps moved as though careful not to disturb the pause enveloping the city. And beneath it all, the silence of Kiev held sway, a delicate and patient presence folding ruin into reflection. The city breathed softly, carrying its quiet fall into memory. Alleys and courtyards bore the traces of movement, soft impressions left in dust, fading slowly under the gentle wind. Civilians navigated cautiously, touching walls, fences, and broken gates with quiet reverence, moving through spaces filled with echoes of life. Horses shifted, heads lowered, their breath curling in small clouds that drifted into cold evening air. Fires glowed faintly, embers lifting soft smoke that mingled with dust, drifting lazily along ruined streets. Conversations persisted in hushed tones, murmured threads weaving memory, reassurance, and the gentle assertion of presence. Windows and doors reflected pale light, shadows stretching and folding in muted patterns across uneven streets. Dust covered every surface, softening angles, hiding fragments of broken stone and wood under gentle layers. Even the distant sounds of movement carried a muted rhythm, absorbed quietly by the city's stillness. And in the hush of nightfall, Kiev seemed to hold its people softly, a gentle companion amid loss. The fall continued, slow and measured, memory enfolding every step. Soft light from lanterns and fires mingled with the first hints of evening stars, reflections mirrored in shattered windows and puddles of melted snow. Civilians moved carefully through streets, pausing to touch familiar structures, breathing softly in rhythm with the quiet night. Horses shifted, the faint rustle of harness and hooves blending into the hush of movement and memory. Fires glowed low, embers rising lazily in gentle spirals, carrying warmth and quiet across empty courtyards. Conversations were whispers, names and small stories passed softly between those who remained. Dust and ash settled slowly over stones, rooftops and doors, softening harsh edges into gentle memory. Even distant echoes of marching or movement were absorbed into the city's patient rhythm, faint and indistinct. Trees along streets swayed softly in the wind, leaves brushing lightly, accompanying the slow pulse of presence. And beneath this tender stillness, the city exhaled its fall transformed into soft memory, carrying every footstep, whisper, and ember gently into night. The story of Kiev leaned quietly into the next chapter, where memory and presence would meet the enduring pulse of the river. Evening deepened, soft and patient, folding over streets, buildings, and the people moving through shadows with delicate reverence. Civilians paused at doorways, stepping lightly over rubble, tracing with fingertips the memory of walls and steps that had guided them before. Horses shifted slowly, their breath forming clouds that mingled with dust and smoke in soft arcs. Fires glimmered low, embers rising, carrying both warmth and the gentle rhythm of quiet persistence. Whispers threaded through streets and courtyards, soft names, faint recollections, and murmured reassurances folding into the stillness. Windows reflected fading light, casting shadows that bent gently across walls, cobblestones and ruined paths. Dust drifted in gentle swirls, settling softly on surfaces, absorbing movement, footsteps, and the quiet exhalation of the city. Even distant footsteps carried faint echoes, muted, ghost-like, woven into the hush of night. And beneath the soft darkness, Kiev seemed to breathe slowly, its fall transformed into gentle remembrance. The city lay quietly beneath the evening sky, patient, soft, and enduring in memory. The long line of captives stretched across the steppe, each figure moving with a steady, measured rhythm, their steps soft against the cold earth. Faces were pale, eyes lowered or distant, tracing thoughts only they could carry through the quiet miles. Dust rose gently beneath countless boots, curling into muted clouds that drifted lazily into the pale sky. Horses and wagons moved intermittently, shadows among the uniformed presence of men, blending their motion into the slow pulse of the march. Conversations were almost non-existent, a faint murmur here or there, folding into the ambient hush of footsteps and wind. The scent of earth, frost and straw mingled softly, carrying the memory of fields and forests left behind. Sunlight fell pale, and even brushing over faces, shoulders and worn clothing, illuminating the vastness with gentle insistence. Every breath seemed deliberate, measured, a rhythm that carried bodies forward while preserving quiet dignity. And beneath it all, the steppe held them softly, patient, indifferent yet present, as if the earth itself acknowledged their passage. Each step folded gently into the long, unbroken march toward the uncertain horizon. Miles passed slowly, the landscape flattening into gentle undulations, each rise and fall absorbing movement like a soft lullaby. Soldiers traced paths through grass and soil, boots pressing into dust that would soon be carried by the wind. Faces turned occasionally toward distant horizons, searching for landmarks, remembering villages, rivers, and trees left behind. The faint rustle of cloth, leather, and soft footsteps mingled with the whisper of wind over fields. Hands brushed against the straps of packs, the rough texture a reminder of the body's endurance against fatigue and quiet pressure. Horses shifted slowly, their breath curling in gentle clouds that drifted into the muted warmth of the day. Shadows lengthened gradually, stretching over lines of figures, softening edges, and folding motion into stillness. Conversations remained whispers, a thread of connection among thousands of footsteps that otherwise moved as one slow, measured entity. And in this long procession, surrender was quiet, solemn, almost meditative, a reflection of endurance without spectacle. Time pressed gently, carrying bodies forward without haste, echoing the stillness of the surrounding land. Sunlight tilted gently over the horizon, illuminating distant hills and roads with soft amber tones that carried warmth without urgency. Soldiers moved through soft earth, dust curling slowly from boots into currents of muted light. Each step was deliberate, measured against the weight of body and pack, and against the quiet rhythm of the march itself. Faces carried faint shadows of thought, memories of home, fleeting images of family, and small comforts now distant. Horses nuzzled lightly at carts, their soft breaths mingling with whispers and dust in gentle arcs. Trees lined parts of the route, their leaves brushing softly in the wind, carrying muted songs of distant birds and rustling foliage. Even the occasional stream reflected pale light, water flowing slowly, unhurried, offering a quiet companion to the patient travelers. Conversations were almost entirely absent, replaced by the soft pulse of footsteps and the breath of wind. And beneath all motion the land itself seemed to cradle the line, gentle and patient, attentive yet impartial. Each step carried both weight and quiet grace, folding endurance into the long passage westward. The line moved across fields that had once been quiet and familiar, now altered by human passage, the earth bearing the soft imprint of countless feet. Soldiers adjusted straps, shifted weight from one foot to another, each motion deliberate, a choreography of quiet persistence. Dust rose and fell gently, mixing with the warmth of the sun and the cool of the wind, carrying faint memories of seasons past. Horses shifted slowly, hooves pressing softly into softened ground, creating a rhythm that merged with thousands of human steps. Conversations were murmurs at most, names whispered, memories recalled, small acts of connection amidst silence. Streams and shallow rivulets appeared intermittently, water flowing calmly, its soft murmur echoing the gentle cadence of the march. Trees cast long muted shadows, brushing softly across bodies and packs, as if lending shade without recognition. Even distant sounds of birds or movement were absorbed quietly into the landscape, threading into the long unbroken line of motion. And through it all, the march persisted, a patient, solemn assertion of survival within surrender. Each step carried its own quiet meaning, folding presence into the endless horizon. Evening approached with slow certainty, shadows stretching across the fields like soft fingers brushing the earth. Soldiers moved steadily, breathing rhythmically, their bodies aligned with the measured pace of the procession. Dust settled slowly over clothing, boots, and packs, softening edges and absorbing movement like a gentle veil. Horses shifted slightly, their breaths mingling with the faint murmur of distant conversation, threading warmth into the muted twilight. Trees leaned gently in the wind, leaves brushing softly together, accompanying the rhythm of quiet steps. Streams reflected the pale amber of descending sun, flowing gently without hurry, a companion to the steady human passage. Voices were almost absent, the occasional whisper folded delicately into the broader silence of earth and sky. Each figure carried memory and endurance like a quiet lantern in the dusk, illuminating the invisible path through patient resolve. And beneath the soft spread of night, the earth held them gently, acknowledging presence without comment, quiet and enduring. The march continued, slow and unbroken, stretching into the shadows that softened the day. Stars appeared gradually in the deepening sky, faint light brushing softly over fields, roads, and the endless line of figures moving steadily westward. Soldiers paused briefly, shifting weight, adjusting packs, touching worn straps, small gestures of human presence in the vast, darkening landscape. Dust mingled with the faint, cool air rising slowly from soft earth, a gentle reminder of passage and effort. Horses exhaled quietly, their breath curling in the chill, rhythm merging with the faint pulse of thousands of footsteps. Fires glowed faintly at intervals, embers lifting into night, fragile beacons in a landscape of quiet endurance. Conversations remained hushed or non-existent, words swallowed gently by distance, absorbed into the vast expanse around them. Trees cast long muted shadows, leaves brushing softly, accompanying movement with a patient, indifferent rhythm. Streams glimmered faintly under starlight, water flowing steadily, folding the night into quiet reflection. And through it all, the march pressed onward, each step a soft testament to dignity, presence, and persistence. The night carried them gently, patient, echoing the steady rhythm of human endurance. Cold light of early morning touched the horizon, soft and pale, illuminating the long lines of figures with gentle clarity. Soldiers shifted and moved slowly, tracing patterns of movement that would fade beneath the hush of fields and roads. Dust rose lazily, soft as breath, merging with the faint warmth of embers or sunlit frost. Horses shuffled carefully, their heads lowered, blending into the quiet rhythm that carried thousands forward without urgency. Whispers passed sparingly, threads of memory, names, and quiet comfort, woven delicately into the silence of the march. Streams reflected light softly, water flowing calmly, unhurried, accompanying the motion of men and animals alike. Trees and hedges lined segments of the route, swaying gently, their leaves brushing softly. A slow rhythm of the landscape folded into the procession. Even distant hills and roads were softened by pale light, their contours absorbing footsteps and presence into quietude. And beneath the gentle emergence of day, the line of prisoners moved steadily, softly, enduring each mile with quiet grace. The horizon stretched endlessly, carrying their steps and the hushed rhythm of their journey toward what lay ahead. The pale sunlight strengthened gradually, folding soft warmth across fields, roads, and moving bodies. Soldiers traced the route in slow, deliberate steps, each breath measured, each movement quiet yet meaningful. Dust and frost mingled gently, rising softly under boots, absorbed by the steady rhythm of forward motion. Horses exhaled in calm clouds, their subtle movements merging with the hush of human passage. Fires glimmered faintly in shallow pits along the route, embers lifting gentle curls of warmth and memory. Names and memories were murmured, whispered softly, carried in low tones that blended into the vastness around them. Streams and rivulets flowed quietly, reflections folding sunlight into motion, a gentle companion to steady progress. Trees brushed softly against the wind, leaves swaying in patient rhythm with the line of human endurance. And beneath the soft expansion of morning, the prisoners moved steadily, each step folding patience, memory, and quiet dignity into the endless landscape. The line stretched onward, slow and unbroken, carrying the echo of presence into the horizon that awaited them. General Kirpinus moved through the quiet remnants of his command with deliberate steps, each one measured against the weight of responsibility and the hush of encirclement. Soldiers fell into step around him, their faces pale, eyes lowered, carrying fatigue, hope, and the faintest glimmers of resolve. The air was soft, almost still, carrying the scent of earth, distant smoke, and the subtle warmth of worn uniforms. Horses shifted nearby, their quiet breaths curling in the cold, mingling with the faint rustle of equipment and the soft shuffle of boots. Each word spoken was low and careful, measured against the enormity of decisions already made and those impossibly deferred. The horizon stretched quietly, empty yet full, echoing the sense of isolation and slow inevitability that pressed gently against the encircled men. Maps lay folded, pensive, in careful hands, bearing the weight of plans that could no longer be realized. And in each motion, each pause, there was a quiet dignity, the small insistence of presence amid the dissolution of certainty. Every glance, every gesture seemed to acknowledge both the fate of a man and the fate of the army he led. Night leaned softly toward them, patient and absorbing, carrying the echo of quiet command into the dark. He paused briefly beside a shallow trench, tracing a finger along the earth, as though reading the soft history of the men who had passed this way. Soldiers moved around him with deliberate slowness, adjusting straps, shifting weight, leaning gently against carts or horses, carrying the rhythm of presence in every motion. The faint scent of frost mingled with smoke and earth, drifting across the encircled space like a slow breath of awareness. Voices were almost absent, reduced to whispers that threaded carefully through the hush, each one a tender assertion of human presence. Horses exhaled softly, their breath mingling with faint murmurs, and the subtle pulse of men, pacing against the quiet inevitability of the moment. Shadows stretched across fields and shallow trenches, soft and patient, folding each movement into calm reflection. Maps and letters rested carefully, folds pressed against palms, tangible reminders of duty and memory. Every gesture carried quiet significance, a soft insistence that presence mattered even as the horizon drew close. And beneath the slowly darkening sky, General Kirpinus moved with the measured grace of those who bear responsibility to the very end. Each step folded authority, loyalty, and quiet courage into the evening, carrying it gently toward the inevitable. He traced the faint impressions of previous movements through the soft earth, each boot print a memory, a silent testament of men who had endured. Soldiers moved gently alongside him, their presence a quiet echo of the larger struggle, folding themselves into the calm rhythm of obedience and patience. The faint rustle of clothing and gear merged with whispers, low and deliberate, creating a gentle symphony of human persistence. Horses shifted slightly, hooves pressing softly into the frozen ground, each breath a small signal of life continuing amid absence and tension. Fires glimmered faintly in shallow pits, the soft glow reflecting on pale faces, embers rising lazily into the muted sky. Maps lay folded, pensively held, the weight of decisions impossible to enact, balanced delicately in careful fingers. Each motion, small and deliberate, spoke of loyalty, patience, and the dignity of command, even when outcomes were already written. Shadows softened the lines of figures and equipment, blending into the muted landscape, carrying all motion gently forward. And in the hush of approaching night, the general's presence seemed to fold time and space around him, a quiet anchor for those still moving. The land absorbed their rhythm softly, patient and still, as the echo of command lingered. He paused briefly, listening to the soft wind across the open field, tracing the gentle murmur of distant movement. Soldiers adjusted position, leaning gently against carts, horses, and one another. Each motion deliberate and unhurried. The scent of earth, frost, and faint smoke carried across the quiet space, mingling with soft whispers of memory and observation. Horses exhaled slowly, breath curling in the cold, merging with the rhythmic pulse of men moving within the circle. Fires glowed faintly, their embers rising into the sky, like soft fragments of thought, carrying warmth and presence into the hush. Maps and documents rested carefully, tangible remnants of the vast responsibilities held in gentle hands. Every gesture, every pause spoke quietly of resilience, patience, and dignity against the tide of inevitability. Shadows lengthened slowly across fields, tents, and trenches, folding movement into calm reflection. And beneath the patient, steadying sky, Kirpinus embodied the quiet, solemn heart of leadership, the weight of an army distilled in one measured presence. Each step and breath carried the echo of loyalty forward, gently into the approaching night. He moved with measured rhythm through scattered units, nodding softly to officers and men, gestures small yet deeply resonant. Soldiers mirrored the gentle tempo, shuffling, shifting, and adjusting with careful deliberation, maintaining presence in each quiet act. The air smelled faintly of frost, wood smoke and earth, each element folding seamlessly into the slow pulse of motion. Horses exhaled quietly, their warmth blending with murmurs of the men, creating a rhythm that was both patient and deliberate. Fires glimmered in shallow pits, their faint light casting soft shadows that moved lazily over faces and equipment. Letters, notes, and folded papers remained close, tangible fragments of duty, memory, and responsibility carried softly in hands. The horizon remained vast and unchanging, a silent witness to the unfolding of quiet destiny. Each gesture, each soft word carried weight beyond measure, a careful balance of authority, presence, and gentle human dignity. And beneath the patient sky, the general moved like a shadow through his command, small yet resolute against the unfolding inevitability. Night deepened slowly, absorbing quiet gestures, whispers, and presence into a soft, enduring hush. The first stars appeared gradually, pale and patient, folding the earth and figures into soft contrast. Soldiers adjusted blankets, packs, and straps, each movement quiet, deliberate, and contained. Dust and frost mingled gently beneath boots and hooves, rising softly to mingle with faint embers of nearby fires. Horses shifted slowly, their breath curling into cold currents, merging with the rhythm of whispered presence. Fires glowed low, embers spiraling upward, marking small points of warmth in the muted landscape. Conversations were sparse, murmured names and recollections, folded into quiet space, like soft threads in an invisible tapestry. Shadows deepened across tents, trenches, and open fields, folding figures into the muted geometry of night. Maps and letters rested carefully, tactile reminders of duty and memory, pressed gently into waiting hands. And beneath the hush of approaching night, the general's movement threaded calm, dignity, and quiet patience through the encircled ranks. Each gesture, each step carried soft, enduring authority forward into the infinite quiet. He paused at the edge of a field, eyes tracing the gentle undulations of terrain that held both memory and inevitability. Soldiers shifted, adjusted, and moved with delicate deliberation, small gestures echoing the persistence of life against circumstance. The faint hum of wind carried across the open landscape, brushing softly against uniforms, faces, and horses, threading calm through the night. Fires glimmered faintly at intervals, embers lifting, swirling, and fading gently into the darkening sky. Each breath, each whisper, each step became a meditation on duty, presence, and the solemn dignity of leadership in despair. Shadows merged with figures, earth and trees, softening lines and creating an endless tapestry of muted motion. Maps rested quietly in hands, symbols of choice now tempered by acceptance, carried with quiet reverence, and beneath the patient stars, General Kirpinus moved gently through the ranks, his presence a soft anchor in the encirclement. Every step folded calm, loyalty, and resolve into the night, carrying meaning beyond action. The night pressed softly forward, patient and silent, embracing both man and army alike. The horizon softened as dawn approached, pale light brushing the encircled fields with gentle warmth. Soldiers moved carefully, their motions slow, deliberate, and measured against exhaustion and quiet resolve. Dust and frost mingled underfoot, rising softly with each step, and absorbed seamlessly into the landscape. Horses shifted, heads lowering, breath curling in the cool air, merging with the soft pulse of human endurance. Fires glowed low, embers drifting gently into the early light, offering warmth and presence against the stillness. Whispers were minimal names, recollections, and small gestures folded carefully into the vastness of the fields. Shadows softened, blending figures, earth and tents, into a seamless muted tapestry of calm. Maps, letters, and other remnants of responsibility rested quietly, tangible proofs of duty carried gently through patient hands. And in this soft arrival of day, General Kirponos moved with quiet gravity, each step and breath a testament to the dignity of command, at the edge of inevitability. The morning held him softly, patient and unjudging, carrying his presence gently into memory. The city of Kiev, now quiet, absorbed the muted celebrations of those who had claimed it. Soldiers walked slowly through streets, once full of motion, boots soft against rubble, their voices low in careful conversation. The air carried the faint scent of smoke, dust, and faint warmth from fires burning low in shallow pits. Flags fluttered gently along avenues, their motion subtle, a quiet assertion of presence rather than exultation. Generals moved among troops with deliberate calm, faces composed, eyes reflecting both satisfaction and the soft weight of concern. Horses shifted under pale light, harnesses clinking faintly, the sound absorbed into the hush of streets and alleys. Even distant shouts of triumph were tempered by wind and shadow, folding into the soft pulse of quiet reflection. Supplies were arranged carefully, tents repositioned, soldiers settling into measured routine, acknowledging the city's silence. The river glimmered faintly under the afternoon sun, its gentle current carrying echoes of passage, victory, and quiet thought. And beneath it all a subtle tension lingered, a soft note beneath the calm that hinted at the days yet to come. Inside command tents, generals spoke in hushed tones, the weight of strategy and caution threading through every word. Maps lay open, lines and markers folded into silent reminders of both success and the limits of achievement. The faint aroma of paper, ink, and leather mingled with earth and distant smoke, a quiet perfume of preparation and reflection. Horses shifted in stalls outside, their soft breaths curling in the cold air, accompanying whispered words with subtle rhythm. Flags overhead fluttered gently, a soft reminder of order. Amid the vast stillness that followed the storm, conversations circled around supply lines, troop disposition, and the distance to distant objectives, all delivered with measured calm. Soldiers moved in disciplined patterns, adjusting packs and checking gear, the quiet hum of routine, threading the soft pulse of human presence. Light filtered through tent flaps, casting gentle patterns across faces, hands, and documents, folding soft illumination into the space. And through it all, an unspoken understanding lingered. That triumph, though quiet, carried the weight of consequence. The evening leaned in slowly, absorbing shadows and whispers into the muted calm. Outside, the soft rustle of leaves accompanied the distant murmur of voices along roads and riverbanks. Soldiers paused in their measured tasks, glancing toward the horizon, observing distance with faint curiosity and tempered caution. Dust rose gently from traveled paths, curling in arcs that dissolved into air, blending with sunlight and faint wind. Horses shifted in quiet cadence, hooves pressing softly into softened soil, creating rhythm without urgency. Fires glowed faintly at intervals, embers rising slowly into pale sky, a reminder of warmth, presence, and endurance. Even in celebration, footsteps were deliberate, careful, each motion threading patience into the subdued victory. Maps and equipment were revisited, notes folded gently, lines traced softly by fingers still aware of impermanence. Voices were low, carrying conversation, folded into reflection, a quiet harmony of awareness beneath the still sky. And above all, the city seemed to exhale softly, holding the present moment with gentle patience. Twilight pressed in slowly, folding streets, figures, and shadow into a muted contemplative rhythm. Men walked through quiet courtyards, boots pressing softly against cobblestones smoothed by passage, carrying measured energy forward without haste. Horses nuzzled carts and wagons, shifting weight and exhaling, forming a calm accompaniment to human motion. Fires glimmered faintly, embers floating in lazy arcs, merging with dust, wind, and memory. Flags fluttered gently overhead, lines folding softly into the rhythm of a city that had witnessed much, yet now slept under observation. Conversations were low, often halting, threaded with both satisfaction and subtle doubt, the tone of experience outweighing the overt joy of triumph. Light played across walls and rubble, casting shadows that stretched, softened, and merged with the figures moving carefully beneath. Papers, maps, and small equipment were handled with gentle precision, each movement deliberate, measured, imbued with awareness of responsibility. Soldiers adjusted blankets and packs, leaning slightly against horses or carts, their motions threading calm and presence together. And in the hush of evening, the city's quiet seemed to embrace them, carrying both achievement and anticipation softly forward. The horizon held its soft patience, a silent witness to measured human triumph. In command halls, generals reviewed positions quietly, speaking with soft emphasis, careful to temper triumph with prudence. Maps were traced gently, markers and annotations noted with slow deliberation, reflecting the depth of awareness behind every movement. The scent of paper, leather, and faint smoke lingered in the air, grounding attention in the present. Soldiers moved methodically outside tents, adjusting gear, checking supplies, their movements blending rhythmically into the calm hum of preparation. Horses shifted softly, heads lowered, breaths curling into cold air, merging with the delicate cadence of human motion. Fires glimmered dimly, embers floating upward in slow arcs, reminders of endurance and life in the quiet of aftermath. Conversations were subdued, carefully measured, each word carrying the subtle weight of foresight and responsibility. Light filtered through flaps and open doors, illuminating faint lines and contours with gentle persistence, a quiet witness to all within. And beneath these careful routines, a sense of calm triumph folded into soft tension, carrying the quiet weight of awareness that victory was only a moment in an unfolding story. Night pressed forward gently, enveloping tense streets and minds in patient reflection. The river mirrored pale light, flowing silently past city walls and quiet avenues, carrying reflections of the subdued celebration. Soldiers paused along banks, watching faint currents, their breath mingling with the cool, soft air, fingers brushing lightly against water or stone. Horses shifted, exhaling softly, hooves pressing into softened soil, blending presence into landscape. Fires burned low nearby, embers rising slowly, threading warmth through dusk without hurry or urgency. Conversations were minimal, whispers carried by wind or absorbed by shadows, folding human motion into the still rhythm of the city. Flags fluttered faintly, gentle movement reminding all of structure, order, and quiet achievement. Soldiers and officers moved carefully, inspecting, observing, folding memory into present tasks with soft diligence. Light dimmed slowly, shadows deepened, forming layers that spoke of time, distance, and the quiet persistence of experience. And in this gentle transition, the mood was both triumphant and reflective, a calm awareness of both presence and consequence. The night carried itself forward patiently, a soft companion to human thought and memory. Within the quiet halls of command, generals shared small, deliberate conversation, noting supply lines, distances, and faint potential pitfalls with careful attention. The soft scent of ink, paper, and smoke threaded through the air, mingling with distant warmth from small fires and low lamps. Soldiers moved in slow rhythm outside, boots pressing softly, each step deliberate, folding motion into quiet reflection. Horses shifted gently in stalls, breaths curling into the cold air, merging with faint human movement in muted harmony. Maps rested under soft light, fingers tracing careful lines, each annotation a quiet meditation on triumph and foresight. Conversations were hushed, eyes occasionally lifting toward the horizon, observing both space and the subtle rhythm of approaching night. Fires glowed low, embers drifting upward, a fragile reflection of achievement and endurance in the muted city. And beneath the patient, quiet sky, victory folded into reflection, triumph mingling with caution, and the soft sense of irony that history carries in its patient hands. Each small gesture carried forward the delicate pulse of calm, attentive awareness. Shadows deepened, drawing the city gently into the fold of night, patient and enduring. Outside, streets were lined with soldiers and horses moving slowly, quietly, deliberately. The rhythm of the city, both triumphal and restrained. Fires glimmered faintly, embers drifting in the soft evening, creating points of warmth against shadows and rubble. Dust rose slowly beneath boots and hooves, mixing with faint smoke, soft and patient. Conversations were almost absent. Murmurs folded into the muted landscape, carrying memory and reflection. Flags fluttered gently, bending to the wind, silent reminders of achievement, yet tempered by awareness. Soldiers adjusted packs, blankets, and gear, their movement deliberate, careful, and rhythmic, threading calm into every gesture. Light waned gradually, casting softened shadows across streets, buildings, and figures, blending presence into muted forms. Maps and documents rested quietly, tangible fragments of awareness, carried in patient hands, and through all this, the sense of calm triumph persisted, laced subtly with foresight and quiet foreboding, the muted echo of consequence, threading softly into memory. Night closed in slowly, holding the city, the soldiers, and the quiet triumph in its gentle embrace. The steppe stretched endlessly under a pale sky, soft grasses swaying gently where the tracks of war had once pressed deep into the soil. Horses wandered slowly, heads lowered, sniffing at the remains of trenches now quiet, their breaths curling faintly in the cool morning air. Villagers moved cautiously across the fields, fingers brushing over overturned earth and the fragments of past days. The scent of soil, frost, and faint smoke mingled with the subtle perfume of wild flowers beginning to bloom in disturbed ground. Dust rose softly from each step, curling and falling back to earth in gentle arcs, as though the land itself were breathing. Trees swayed quietly in the wind, leaves whispering softly, tracing the slow passage of sunlight across open fields. Streams ran clear and steady, carrying reflections of sky, grass, and the occasional shadow of a wandering horse. The distant horizon held pale warmth, stretching infinitely, a reminder that time continued even after human struggles, and in this soft, expansive quiet, the steppe seemed to fold memory and presence together, patient and enduring. Each gentle movement echoed with the calm insistence of life, reclaiming its rhythm. Villagers paused at a shallow ditch, sifting through soil with careful hands, finding fragments that told stories without words. Horses shifted beside them, hooves pressing softly into softened earth, ears flicking gently at distant sounds. The wind carried faint whispers through grass, threading patience and calm into the slow rhythm of exploration. Leaves rustled overhead, brushing lightly against one another, creating a gentle accompaniment to measured footsteps. Streams glimmered faintly, water flowing steadily, reflecting both pale sky and quiet figures in their slow currents. The smell of damp earth, softened by frost and sunlight, mingled with distant smoke, forming a delicate memory of presence. Dust rose lazily from soft earth as tools pressed and sifted, curling gently into the morning air. Conversations were minimal, murmurs folded into the vastness, speaking softly without urgency. And through it all the land itself seemed to absorb motion, carrying stories forward in patient, endless rhythm. The horizon stretched quietly, holding memory, life, and renewal in gentle balance. Horses drifted between shallow embankments, exploring abandoned trenches with soft curiosity, nostrils flaring as they inhaled the faint scent of history. Villagers moved slowly across fields, hands tracing softened earth, each touch deliberate, each breath measured against calm observation. Dust curled upward in faint lazy clouds, mixing with wind and sunlight, threading quiet warmth across open land. Trees bent gently with the breeze, their rustling leaves echoing subtle notes of calm, a rhythm shared with the soft steps of human presence. Streams glimmered under pale light, reflecting shadows of horses and the tentative figures of villagers moving with care. Broken tools, scattered fragments, and remnants of hurried abandonment rested quietly among grass, waiting for hands to unfold their muted stories. Conversations were hushed, whispers blending into the broader silence of land, slowly healing, carrying memory without haste. And beneath the soft expanse of sky, the steppe itself seemed to fold past and present together, patient and forgiving. Each gentle step, each careful hand, threaded connection and observation into the quiet landscape. Life persisted in its soft, enduring rhythm, carrying forward the slow, hypnotic pulse of the earth. The sun leaned gently across open fields, brushing warmth against grass, horses, and quiet hands that moved over softened earth. Villagers paused by shallow streams, cupping water, fingers tracing gentle ripples, connecting softly with the landscape. Horses shifted their weight slowly, noses brushing the grass, ears flicking at distant murmurs, soft motion threading presence into the calm rhythm. Dust rose in curling arcs beneath boots and hooves, carried slowly by wind across open space, disappearing into the horizon. Trees bent gently overhead, leaves brushing together, a muted chorus accompanying careful footsteps and quiet breathing. Embers from distant fires glimmered faintly, rising lazily, marking warmth in a land slowly returning to patient calm. Fragments of past presence, tools and signs of hurried activity, rested quietly, speaking softly without words, absorbed gently into the earth. Conversations were sparse, murmurs folded into expansive quiet, carrying stories of endurance and survival. And through it all, the land breathed with measured patience, folding each motion, sound, and scent into its endless rhythm. The horizon stretched endlessly, soft and forgiving, holding life and memory in gentle balance. Horses grazed quietly along embankments, shifting slowly, their breaths curling into the pale morning air. Villagers moved deliberately among soft mounds of earth, hands tracing textures, folding memory into careful reverent motion. Dust rose softly beneath each movement, curling in arcs before settling, absorbed into the patient ground. Leaves swayed gently, brushing together, threading subtle rhythm into the muted soundscape. Streams wound lazily across open fields, their waters glimmering faintly, reflecting sky, horse and human presence in quiet harmony. Fires smouldered low at intervals, embers drifting upward in slow arcs, the faint warmth joining the gentle stillness of morning. Tools, fragments, and scattered belongings rested quietly, tangible threads of history held in careful observation. Conversations were minimal, whispers blending with rustling leaves, flowing water and faint hoofbeats in gentle resonance. And beneath it all the steppe seemed to cradle the land's memory, soft and patient, threading past presence into the unfolding present. Each careful step and breath carried reflection and reverence across open fields, folding calm and continuity together. The wind moved softly across open space, lifting faint dust and curling leaves into gentle, swirling arcs. Horses drifted slowly, grazing, moving with measured curiosity among trenches and broken earth. Villagers paused often, hands brushing soil and grass, fingers tracing fragments with slow deliberation. Streams glimmered faintly, water moving with soft insistence, reflecting sky, land, and movement in subtle harmony. Dust mixed with faint warmth, carrying scent of earth, frost, and lingering smoke across expansive fields. Trees bent gently, leaves brushing against one another, echoing rhythm into every subtle motion. Fires glimmered low in small pits, embers rising and fading into soft light, markers of presence and endurance. Conversations were muted, low, intermittent, blending seamlessly into the ambient hush of land, reclaiming itself. And beneath pale sky, every soft gesture, from horse to human to windswept leaf, carried reflection, reverence, and the patient persistence of life. The steppe held everything gently, allowing each element its quiet space in the slow rhythm of renewal. Horses shifted slowly among abandoned positions, nostrils flaring as they inhaled subtle scents of earth and grass, recovering from disturbance. Villagers moved carefully, tracing paths between fields and shallow trenches, fingers brushing soft soil with measured respect. Dust rose and fell lazily under boots and hooves, curling gently in arcs, before settling back into patient earth. Trees swayed lightly, rustling leaves threading subtle rhythm across the open land, soft accompaniment to the steady motion of humans and animals. Streams reflected pale sunlight, water moving quietly, a companion to all who passed along its edges. Fires glimmered intermittently, their embers lifting in slow arcs, faint warmth mingling with the soft, expansive hush of early morning. Tools and fragments of previous conflict rested quietly, tangible reminders absorbed gently into grass and earth. Whispers were rare, voices low, blending seamlessly with distant rustle and gentle wind. And through it all, the steppe persisted with measured patience, folding memory, presence, and recovery into the endless rhythm of life. Every gentle motion carried calm reflection and the hypnotic pulse of time passing softly across the landscape. The horizon softened under pale light, stretching endlessly across fields, abandoned trenches, and scattered figures. Horses wandered, grazing slowly, their presence quiet and unhurried, blending with the gentle rhythm of land and wind. Villagers traced paths with careful attention, hands brushing soil and grass, observing and remembering. Dust curled faintly beneath soft steps, disappearing into the vast patient earth. Trees swayed in measured arcs, leaves whispering in the soft wind, threading subtle sound into the rhythm of space. Streams carried reflections of sky and movement, water flowing calmly, folding motion and light into quiet harmony. Fires smoldered gently, embers drifting upward, soft warmth marking intervals of life within silence. Conversations were minimal, murmurs absorbed into the soft expanse of recovering land, carrying memory quietly forward. and beneath it all, the steppe held life with patient endurance, threading reflection and renewal through each gentle breath and step. The land whispered softly, carrying presence, memory, and the slow rhythm of time into the unfolding day. The city of Kiev, now subdued under occupation, seemed to breathe quietly beneath a pale sun, its streets empty of hurried footsteps and faint echoes of recent life. Soldiers moved with deliberate purpose, arranging positions, checking supplies, and observing a calm that contrasted sharply with the urgency of months past. The river, broad and patient, wound steadily through the landscape, reflecting sky and silent bridges. A reminder that time continued, despite human striving. Maps rested in soft hands, lines and markers tracing movements, distances, and the slow, inevitable consequences of victory. Conversations were muted, often reflective, officers and men aware that success here required time and energy that could have pressed elsewhere. Horses shifted softly, hooves pressing gently into softened earth, blending into the rhythm of movement and observation. The wind stirred grass and dust, carrying scent of river and earth, threading subtle calm through the quiet ranks. And in the stillness of city and field, there lingered an awareness that triumph could be both sustaining and deceptive, delicate in its balance. Each moment folded awareness, reflection, and quiet calculation into the soft pulse of occupation. The horizon stretched calmly, patient, hinting at consequences yet to unfold. Generals conferred in tents, their voices subdued, careful, each word carrying both weight and restraint. Maps lay open, their folds soft and inviting, marking positions and distances with gentle precision. The scent of paper, ink, and faint smoke mingled with the earthy smell of nearby fields and stables. Soldiers adjusted packs, straps, and harnesses outside, each step deliberate, quiet, and steady, forming a muted rhythm of calm observation. Horses exhaled slowly, their breaths curling into cool morning air, merging subtly with low conversation and occasional clatter of equipment. Fires glimmered faintly, embers rising lazily, casting soft warmth into the still tents and surrounding area. Each discussion carried reflection, a careful threading of strategy with patience, measuring the cost of pursuit against the gains of delayed triumph. And through it all, there was a sense of gentle irony that victories achieved in haste, or with concentrated effort, might slow larger objectives. Dust curled lazily in soft arcs across open ground, carrying scent, warmth, and calm through the ranks. The steppe and city seemed to lean in, patient observers of deliberate human calculation. Outside the city, fields stretched endlessly, broken only by slow-moving patrols and the occasional wandering horse. Dust rose faintly beneath soft, measured steps, curling in lazy arcs before settling gently back to earth. Grass swayed under pale wind, whispering a quiet rhythm that threaded patience into every motion. Streams glimmered, reflecting sky, figures, and the slow unfolding of activity in their steady, endless flow. Villagers emerged cautiously, observing soldiers, horses, and quiet traces of past disturbance, their movements careful and reflective. Fires burned low, embers rising in slow arcs, subtle markers of warmth and presence in a landscape of muted rhythm. Conversations were minimal, murmurs carried by wind or absorbed into grass and earth, echoing reflection without urgency. And beneath it all, the land seemed to absorb both movement and calculation, patient and unjudging, carrying human intent forward softly. Every gentle motion, every soft breath, threaded strategy and calm into the slowly turning day. Time passed quietly, carrying both triumph and caution across open fields. Officers moved among soldiers with subtle attentiveness, noting posture, readiness, and the quiet rhythm of energy across the occupied city. Horses shifted beneath their loads, hooves pressing into softened earth, exhaling gently, a companion to human care and observation. Dust rose faintly with each step, curling into the air like a soft meditation on presence and motion. Grass swayed slowly, brushing softly against boots and hooves, echoing the calm rhythm of calculation. Fires glimmered in scattered locations, embers spiraling upward in gentle arcs, reflecting warmth and life in quiet intervals. Maps lay open, pens tracing faint lines of distance, routes and strategic potential with delicate patience. Conversations were measured, deliberate, each word carrying weight without urgency, threaded with awareness of consequence. And across the streets, fields, and riverbanks, the subtle irony of triumph was woven into the quiet pattern of routine, reflection, and waiting. The horizon stretched pale and patient, holding each gentle movement within its unhurried span. Each step and breath carried awareness forward, quietly bridging victory and the turn of events yet to come. The river wound steadily, its broad surface reflecting sky and motion with calm continuity. Soldiers moved slowly along its banks, adjusting gear, observing lines, and tracing the soft rhythm of currents. Horses grazed quietly nearby, nostrils flaring as they inhaled faint scents of grass, water, and lingering earth. Dust rose in gentle spirals under measured steps, settling back into patient soil with soft insistence. Grass swayed, leaves brushed against one another, and wind carried faint whispers of past movement, threading memory into presence. Fires glimmered intermittently, embers drifting lazily into pale sunlight, a subtle measure of warmth across quiet fields. Maps rested in hands, lines traced gently, each annotation a meditation on distance, timing, and consequence. And through it all, there was a soft awareness that victory at Kiev, though decisive, carried within it seeds of delay, a circular tension that history would reveal. Conversations were minimal, murmurs folded into wind and movement, threading reflection into the landscape. Time passed slowly, patient as the river and fields held all action within their gentle, enduring rhythm. Patrols moved along quiet roads, boots pressing softly against cobblestones and soil, a rhythm of measured movement. Horses shifted with deliberate patience, hooves pressing into earth softened by frost and dust, exhaling faint warmth into the morning air. Grass swayed gently in the wind, whispering subtle echoes of presence and observation across the open fields. Fires glimmered low along edges of streets and fields, embers rising lazily into pale sky, carrying warmth in still intervals. Maps and papers rested quietly in hands folded and annotated with care, reflections of distance, strategy, and foresight. Conversations remained subdued, voices low and deliberate, each word carrying a sense of weight and consequence. Dust rose faintly beneath steady steps, folding softly into sunlight, wind and the muted rhythm of activity, and across city, river, and fields. The irony of measured triumph threaded quietly through human effort, a soft lesson for those who observed and endured. Every gentle gesture, every careful step wove calm awareness into the slowly unfolding day. The horizon remained patient, extending infinite space for reflection and quiet movement. Inside command areas, officers gathered in soft consultation, exchanging notes with subdued voices, measuring the distance between present success and distant objectives. Maps were laid open, traced gently, lines and markers folded into patient calculation. The scent of paper, ink, and faint smoke mingled with the earthy aroma of surrounding fields, blending reflection with observation. Soldiers moved outside, boots pressing softly into soil, hooves shifting beneath packs and harnesses, maintaining a muted, deliberate rhythm. Fires glimmered intermittently, embers curling lazily into pale sky, markers of warmth and presence within quiet intervals. Conversations threaded through careful pauses, soft reflection, and muted laughter that acknowledged both victory and the subtle caution it demanded. And beneath the expansive patient sky, each gentle gesture, each deliberate step, folded awareness, triumph, and irony together into soft continuity. Dust swirled lazily across fields and streets, tracing ephemeral paths that vanished almost immediately, a quiet echo of human effort. The river flowed steadily, its calm surface holding reflections of city, field, and sky. Time moved softly, patient and enduring, threading both triumph and foresight into the gentle rhythm of history. The horizon stretched endlessly, pale light threading across fields, river, and quiet streets, softening the edges of motion and memory. Soldiers walked slowly, observing, adjusting, and reflecting on the labor of achievement, each step deliberate and unhurried. Horses shifted, nostrils flaring, breaths curling faintly into the air, their rhythm merging subtly with human motion. Dust rose gently beneath boots and hooves, curling into arcs that disappeared softly into patient soil. Grass and trees swayed, leaves brushing against each other, threading subtle sound into the calm air. Fires glimmered faintly, embers rising, drifting, and fading gently into the soft light, markers of warmth and continuity. Conversations were minimal, murmurs absorbed into the wind, water, and open space, echoing reflection and foresight. Maps lay quietly in hands, annotations and lines tracing distances and potential, folded softly into the rhythm of patient calculation. And across city, river, and field, the calm awareness of victory carried both achievement and caution, threading the quiet pulse of history forward. The steppe and horizon seemed to breathe slowly, patient and unhurried, carrying presence, reflection, and the gentle turning of the tide. Kiev rose again from rubble and ash, streets swept clean, facades painted in soft pastels that caught the gentle light of morning. Trees lined avenues where soldiers once marched, their leaves rustling quietly in the breeze, carrying stories older than the city's new bricks. Memorials dotted parks and squares, bronze and stone glinting faintly under the sun, silent reminders of absence and endurance. Old men and women moved slowly along these spaces, their steps measured, hands brushing lightly over engraved names that spoke of youth and courage now past. Grass grew unevenly over forgotten graves, soft and persistent, threading green into memory's quiet spaces. The air smelled faintly of earth, rain, and distant smoke, weaving a muted connection to what had been lost and remembered. Children played where shadows of history lingered, their laughter a gentle counterpoint to lingering quiet. And through the city, soft wind carried the echo of voices, folded now into whispers, patient and reverent. Streets and squares seemed to breathe slowly, calm and measured, holding memory and renewal in gentle balance. Life continued quietly, a meditation on endurance, absence, and the passage of time. Bronze figures on pedestals caught light and shadow, the faint glint moving with the sun's arc, as if breathing alongside the city. Elderly survivors lingered near plaques, fingers tracing the contours of letters that carried both grief and memory. The air held the subtle scent of moss and damp stone, mingling with faint perfume from nearby gardens. Birds alighted on statues and memorials, their quiet calls threading the soft rhythm of life into spaces of reflection. Children's footsteps echoed across plazas, brushing lightly against cobblestones, brushing past memories held beneath the surface. Dust and pollen drifted lazily in shafts of sunlight, settling on benches and monuments with gentle insistence. Conversations were murmurs, low and reflective, blending into the ambient hush of streets that held absence without hurry. Grass swayed in soft arcs along pathways, threading past and present together in patient rhythm, and across avenues and squares, the city exhaled slowly, carrying stories forward in measured whispers. Memory, like wind through trees, folded itself gently into the living city. Rivers flowed with quiet constancy, reflecting sky, bridges, and passing boats with soft reverence. Footpaths along embankments curved gently, lined with small memorials and simple flowers left by those who remembered. The hum of distant traffic moved softly, subdued, as though aware of the weight of history beneath each passing wheel. Elderly men sat on benches, gazing at water, eyes tracing ripples that mirrored past and present, blending reflection into the calm of the moment. Grass pushed up between stones and along the riverbank, persistent and forgiving, a testament to renewal after long disturbance. Faint bird calls punctuated the quiet air, mingling with whispers of wind across stone and water. Conversations between old friends were measured, voices low, carrying recollection without urgency. And beneath sky and river, the city's heartbeat slowed, threading memory and continuity into the flow of present life. Each ripple, each gust of wind, seemed to carry fragments of voices folded into gentle cadence. The horizon along the river stretched soft and infinite, holding absence, presence, and quiet endurance together. Squares opened wide beneath pale sunlight, flags fluttering softly, their colors muted in reflective calm. Statues of anonymous soldiers stood sentinel, quiet and patient, their faces fixed in permanence that invited meditation. Children's footsteps skipped lightly across stone paths, brushing past faint cracks where grass grew with persistence and care. Flowers, tended or wild, leaned gently toward light, offering color in spaces shaped by remembrance and loss. Elderly couples moved slowly, hands clasped, voices quiet, each step a delicate measure of time and reflection. The scent of baked bread from nearby cafes mingled subtly with the faint aroma of damp earth and stone memorials. Dust rose in small arcs beneath shoes, settling gently, absorbed into brick, grass, and the quiet pulse of the city. Murmured conversations threaded the still air, carrying memory forward without haste, folding past into present softly, and across broad avenues and narrow streets, the city exhaled, measured and reverent, holding echoes of presence in calm embrace. Life unfolded quietly, a rhythm that acknowledged both loss and the gentle persistence of renewal. Memorial plaques lined alleys and gardens, each name a quiet beacon of remembrance. Their edges softened by wind and rain. Elderly hands brushed letters with care, tracing the curves of names that whispered stories no longer spoken aloud. Grass and flowers pressed gently against stone, threading green and color into spaces shaped by absence. The air moved softly, carrying warmth, scent, and faint echoes of voices folded into memory. Birds perched on walls, cooing and flitting between branches, their rhythm a gentle counterpoint to human stillness. Footsteps were light, careful, brushing past memorials, as if disturbing nothing, and yet honoring all fires in distant kitchens, carried warmth into open windows, mingling domestic life with the muted reverence of public remembrance. and across gardens, paths, and quiet streets, memory seemed to rise in invisible waves, brushing softly over stones, grass, and human presence. Conversations were whispers, carried in subtle cadence, blending with wind leaves and distant river currents. Time itself seemed to slow, patient, carrying past, present, and renewal together in soft continuum. Parks opened with gentle slopes, benches placed at intervals beneath quiet trees. Light brushed softly against leaves, casting pale shadows on paths and patches of grass, a gentle interplay of calm and reflection. Flowers nodded in mild wind, delicate petals brushing together, scent threading subtly into the surrounding air. Elderly survivors moved slowly, speaking rarely, letting silence carry memory in measured waves. Grass grew unevenly over small graves, each tuft and blade a soft testimony to persistence and quiet endurance. Dust and pollen drifted lazily through the air, settling on paths, benches, and memorials, blending present and past gently. Children played in distant corners, laughter soft and harmonious with the rhythmic quiet of remembrance. Conversations were minimal, murmurs folding into the steady, calm rhythm of park and city. And beneath sky, stone, and greenery, Kiev carried both weight and release, a patient dialogue of absence and persistence. Life moved softly forward, folding memory into every gentle gesture, every quiet breath. Along cobbled streets, quiet fountains trickled, water flowing steadily over worn stone edges, reflecting sunlight and the soft rhythm of presence. Horses, now rare, shifted slowly along market paths, hooves pressing faintly into the resilient ground, breaths curling in calm arcs. Flowers leaned along windowsills, grass swayed between bricks, each small movement threading the pulse of renewal into the city's heartbeat. Elderly residents paused to rest, eyes tracing familiar landmarks, streets softened by time and careful reconstruction. Dust rose gently in subtle eddies, settling softly over benches, cobblestones, and low walls, a delicate embrace of patience. Voices were low, each word folded gently into reflection and memory, carried softly by wind and open air. Fires in hearths lent warmth, mingling faint scent with that of distant rain and soil, a quiet comfort in spaces shaped by history. And across streets, squares, and gardens, the city seemed to exhale slowly, carrying absence, reflection, and endurance in measured cadence. Every footstep, every breeze threaded present and past into a soft, unhurried harmony. Kiev, rebuilt yet haunted, moved forward gently, patient and reverent, carrying memory in ash, grass, and whispered stories. Monuments stood in quiet dignity, their surfaces worn by wind, rain, and the passing of decades, each a reminder of fragility and endurance. Elderly hands brushed over edges, tracing names and letters with deliberate care, connecting touch and memory. Grass grew softly between stones, weaving green into the rigid lines of remembrance, resilient and forgiving. Birds perched on edges, calling softly, threading rhythm and life into spaces shaped by human absence. Children's laughter drifted faintly, mingling with the rustle of leaves, distant water, and muted voices. Dust settled slowly, undisturbed, carrying faint scent of earth, flowers, and lingering warmth into every corner. Fires in kitchens and cafes glimmered softly, marking intervals of life in subtle counterpoint to solemn stillness. And through streets, parks, and avenues, Kiev exhaled softly, carrying echoes of presence, memory, and the gentle persistence of the living. Conversations were rare, murmured reflections flowing into air, leaves and water in quiet cadence. Time moved slowly, patient and eternal, carrying history forward in soft breath, ash and grass. Things that the fields surrounding Kiev stretch endlessly under a pale sky, their gentle waves of grass swaying softly in the wind. The air carries the faint scent of earth, flowers, and distant river water, threading memory into present calm. Children run along paths once scarred by conflict, their laughter rising and falling like gentle music, filling spaces once hushed with fear and uncertainty. Trees, tall and patient, cast slow shadows across fields, offering shade and quiet observation of this timeless rhythm. Birds circle above, their wings slicing through light, their calls threading life into the tranquil air. Fences, old and new, mark boundaries that seem irrelevant in the continuity of land, earth, and sky. The hum of distant villages mixes with the soft rustle of grass, forming a gentle chorus of continuity and peace. And across every stretch of meadow and grove, the memory of war folds softly into soil, air, and light, carrying quiet reverence. Children pause to pick flowers, small hands brushing gently against stems, absorbing the calm of fields that remember. The sky hangs wide and unhurried, holding all this together in a patient, watchful embrace. Footpaths trace through tall grass, worn gently by walkers and wanderers, who pause to feel the soil beneath their feet. The air moves slowly, stirring the leaves of trees, carrying faint scent of rain from distant clouds, and mingling with the warmth of sunlit earth. Birds hop along fence lines and fence posts, occasionally taking flight with soft wings beating against light. Children chase each other across the open stretches, their small voices a delicate echo of presence in a land that has held memory and time. Grass bends softly under footsteps, returning almost immediately to its upright, patient rhythm. Old stone walls, partially reclaimed by moss and ivy, mark the remnants of a distant past, silent and enduring. The river murmurs quietly in the distance, its water carrying reflections of sky, land, and human passage. The breeze lifts dust and pollen in delicate arcs, settling gently over flowers, paths, and worn benches, and as sunlight stretches across field and river, the memory of battle folds softly into calm, measured peace. The quiet pulse of earth, grass, and sky threads all together, a slow, unbroken cadence of presence. In orchards beyond the city, fruit trees sway gently, their branches brushing against one another with a soft, rhythmic whisper. The air carries faint fragrance of blossoms and ripening fruit, a delicate counterpoint to distant echoes of past years. Children weave between trees, laughter bouncing softly against trunks and fallen leaves, a living rhythm that honors the passage of time. Birds nest quietly in the branches, their small movements threading a gentle continuity through the orchard. Grass grows thick between roots, resilient and patient, soft underfoot as tiny hands and feet brush against it. Paths of worn soil trace faint lines across the orchard, telling stories of generations who walked them quietly, leaving subtle marks of presence. Bees hum low, moving from blossom to blossom, their rhythm gentle, unhurried, a meditation on life's continuity. And through these spaces the weight of memory is felt in calm, as earth, tree, and sky fold together all that has passed into present tranquility. Flowers sway in light wind, petals brushing softly, threading color into the slow pulse of day. The horizon stretches wide, embracing orchard, meadow, and memory in one continuous breath. Fields once scarred by earth and movement now lie open and undisturbed, soft under sun and wind. The gentle curve of hills invites eyes to wander, carrying thought across expanses where absence has become presence in quiet reflection. Birds drift lazily through the sky, their calls weaving softly into the rhythm of grass and flowers below. Children pause along small paths, hands touching petals or smooth stones, connecting with land patient and enduring. Trees bend in mild breeze, their leaves brushing gently, echoing a quiet hum of life in every corner. The river moves steadily, its surface calm, reflecting clouds, light and passing wings with gentle constancy. Wild flowers lean into sunlight, petals open wide, absorbing warmth, offering beauty in the patient presence of growth. Fences, and markers of old settlements remain as soft witnesses, partially hidden in swaying grass, patient and enduring, and across hills, rivers, and meadows, the land remembers silently, carrying history gently beneath calm sun and patient sky. The wind moves softly, threading together earth, memory, and presence in an unbroken, tranquil cadence. Memorials rise quietly along pathways, stones etched with names that speak softly across decades. Flowers bloom around them, bending gently in breeze, threading beauty and calm into spaces defined by remembrance. Elderly visitors pause at each monument, fingers tracing letters with deliberate care, whispers of memory carried in soft exhalations. Children skip nearby, their voices lilting and bright, a gentle affirmation of life continuing amidst history. Grass grows thick between memorial stones, soft and persistent, threading green and life into spaces marked by absence. Trees cast slow, dappled shadows over benches and pathways, offering cool respite and reflection. Birds alight on edges of stone, wings fluttering softly, their rhythm echoing presence, continuity, and the calm of observation. And across quiet avenues of remembrance, the city exhales slowly, carrying memory, presence, and renewal in equal measure. Soft winds lift petals and leaves, scattering them gently, as if folding memory into earth itself. Time moves slowly here, patient and reverent, threading stories of past, present, and future into a quiet whole. Along riverside paths, water moves with gentle persistence, reflecting sky, trees, and passing figures in a calm mirror of continuity. Small boats drift lazily, their movements folded into the soft pulse of wind, grass, and river. Children's laughter rises and falls, mingling with bird calls, flowing water, and distant murmur of voices, forming a gentle symphony of living calm. Grass bends beneath tiny feet, springy and resilient, pushing upward again after each touch. Trees sway in unhurried rhythm, brushing lightly against one another, threading subtle movement into the gentle air. Flowers lean along riverbanks, petals brushing softly, catching light and scent in delicate harmony. Footsteps trace soft lines along worn paths, leaving fleeting impressions soon absorbed by earth's patient persistence. And across river field and distant village, the city breathes quietly, carrying memory gently within its folds. Dust and pollen drift slowly, settling softly over stone, grass and flowers, connecting past and present in subtle cadence. The horizon stretches pale and patient, holding sky, land and memory in quiet, enduring watchfulness. Hills beyond the city roll gently, soft under the glow of fading sun, shadows stretching long and calm across grass and flowers. The air carries faint scent of earth, wildflowers and distant river, a gentle blend of life and history. Children wander among paths, occasionally pausing to pick a blossom or feel the soft curve of a stone, threading curiosity into quiet reflection. Birds drift lazily overhead, calling softly their rhythm, echoing the calm persistence of earth and sky. Trees lean lightly in wind, their leaves brushing each other, forming a quiet song of resilience and continuity. The river glimmers far below, reflecting sky, earth and fleeting human presence with gentle consistency. Grass bends, dust rises briefly, then settles softly, absorbing the weight of presence and the echoes of absence alike. And across hills, valleys, and distant plains, memory folds seamlessly into calm, leaving no urgency, only patient awareness. Flowers sway gently in breeze, nodding slowly, threading life and color into landscape, memory and quiet reflection. In the silence above Kiev, the sky remembers, but it no longer mourns.